How are you all friends? So today we are gonna see what if Naruto was helping a mother find Piper daughter movie. Miranda sobbed quietly on her knees before the cryostasis chamber that held the well-preserved corpse of her beloved husband. She was unsure of just how long she was out after those people had stolen her daughter and murdered Nathan, but even now, as she mourned her loss, she realized she had to move forward and find her. For both of their sake, she wiped away her tears on the terse blue sleeve of her vault suit and stood, with some trouble as her legs felt both sore and stung with pinpricks from being static. Once on her feet she moved forward and pressed her hand to the frigid glass separating her from her husband, and her ache intensified. But she did not cry because she no longer could. Miranda realized she also wouldn't be able to move him. She simply wasn't strong enough at the moment, but she could at the very least take a reminder of him before she left. Once she found her daughter, and she would find her daughter, she would come back to give him a proper burial. That much she promised herself. Miranda pressed the round red button on the small terminal next to his chamber, but nothing happened. She slammed her hand on the button a few more times out of desperation before realizing her efforts were getting her no closer to what she needed to do. She took a quick look around the room, trying her best not to focus on the people she once considered neighbors, acquaintances, and some even friends. Their vital signs were displayed on the terminal closest to their pods, much in the way it was for her husband. They were all gone. The soft green hue of a computer caught Miranda's eye. It seemed important as it was the only one in the room, and in the lieu of any other solution, she decided to investigate it. A sharp pain in her lower back had Miranda taking a seat at the terminal. That minor setback aside, she was relieved to discover it did not require a password to access, as it was already logged in by an administrator. Displayed on the black and green screen were a list of prompts. The reports for the stasis pods drew her attention first, leading her to the individual status and information of each person. Her morbid curiosity ultimately got the better of her, and she decided to check on the status of Jane Peters, the first name among the list which first caught her attention. She was a woman Miranda remembered from church and not much else. Her basic physical attributes aside, the computer revealed she died of asphyxiation. As did the two others whose profile she looked through. Evidently all the pods had all gone offline 2 hours due to a power failure, leading to the asphyxiation of those within the pods. Miranda tried hard not to question why she had lived when everyone else hadn't, or to ponder on what could have been if only she had woken up a couple of hours sooner. She could not bring herself to look over the status of her husband. Having digressed long enough, she decided to return to the initial directory in hopes of finding a way to open the pod. However, just before she did so, something else caught her attention. A pod with the word unknown as the name of the occupant. In the end, she didn't investigate the matter any further. Whomever was in the pod was dead, and she didn't need to be told that. After some searching and even more dead ends, Miranda found what she was looking for and overrode all of the locks. Miranda found her eyes burning anew in the presence of the wound that ended her husband's life. It was beginning to bleed now that the temperature within the pod began to rise. She wouldn't be able to contain her already fragile composure if she witnessed him bleed any further, so she moved as quickly and as gently as she could. She removed the silver wedding band from off his finger and gave him a final, lingering kiss on the cheek. It was hard to ignore the cold of his skin. "I'll find her, love, I promise, for the both of us." She couldn't bring herself to look at him again after that. She wanted their kiss to be their final and most treasured memory together. Miranda walked past the pods on her way out, feeling numb and moving with no real direction in mind. She paused when her eyes fell upon the still body of a man, his hair color catching the light and her attention. He was so young, almost a man, but not quite so. Despite her better judgment, Miranda approached the pod and looked in to confirm what she thought to have seen. The blonde young man had 2 sets of 3 whisker-like marks lined up perfectly parallel to one another and on each cheek. His heart rate monitor was not flat-lined like the others. In fact, the monitor belonging to him was completely shut off. Despite this, Miranda didn't hold any illusions. He was dead, like the others. Something told her to investigate. A lingering feeling of curiosity which ultimately brought her back to the computer. All the while Miranda knew she had to get moving as soon as possible, but she was always a curious girl before she was a woman, and there was something telling her to investigate. Name. Unknown. Date of birth. Unknown. Sex. Male. Height. 60. Weight. 203 lbs. Hair color. Blonde. Eye color. Blue. Current status. Alive. Condition. Critical. Miranda ran to the pod containing the young man. Unbelieving there was someone else alive, she slammed her fist on the opening button and anxiously awaited as the door lumbered open. Once it did, she realized she had no idea on how to proceed. He remained unmoving aside from the slow but consistent rise and fall of his chest. Tentatively she reached to touch his forehead and was surprised at just how warm he felt despite the chill of his pod. It was almost as if he were running a fever, but much worse than any she'd ever experienced. Miranda was by no means knowledgeable when it came to medicine beyond the typical home remedies instilled into her through the years by her mother. However, common sense dictated the heat he was radiating could not be good for his health. Her husband, for as much as she loved him, was gone. Nothing she could ever hope to do could change that now. This young man was not, and Miranda resolved to do what she could to save him. Looping his arm around her shoulder, she tried to pull his weight onto her center of gravity. Soon though, she realized her mistake as the unmoving body of the 200-pound man began to overpower her meek strength. She cursed as she tried and failed to hold the man's larger body against her own. Unfortunately, a combination of his weight and height finally overtook her own, sending him toppling down onto the unforgiven ground beneath. Miranda fell close behind as she tried her best to hold him up until the very end. She found herself falling atop the man and his chest as a result of her efforts. Miranda was not given the opportunity to feel guilty as she was met with a pair of purple eyes. Naruto looked down to the woman atop him in shock at the vast information his eyes revealed to him. His mind was flooded with information of a world vastly different than his own, yet so similar in so many harrowing ways. War, like people, never seemed to change. From the memories of the woman, Miranda, he not only learned a new language, but of the end of the world. Again, his own came to an end after months of non-stop, grueling war, a war they had won, and ultimately lost. It was a shallow victory. All of his loved ones were gone. One by one they fell in varying stages of the war, falling to both heroes and villains of the past, figures of legend in both fame and infamy. The succeeding generations were not always meant to surpass the talent which preceded them. Peace made them complacent, and it was that complacency that led to loss. It had taken the combined efforts of Team 7 to finally defeat Kaguya. As was the constant with war, their victory came at a great price. He was the sole survivor of his team. He was also the one to deliver the final technique which finally put a stop to Kaguya's attempted insurrection. Contradicting all he believed, Naruto had gone at the goddess with all of his hatred, pouring it into a planetary devastation, trapping her in a ball of overwhelming gravity. As it turned out, even gods were capable of succumbing to death. In any other situation, he would have found the irony vindication, to have been defeated by her own descendant. But her defeat came far too late, with all of his energy spent and the constant fighting having taken a toll on his body. Naruto was left on the verge of death. He had neither the will nor the strength to continue, and even if he did, Kaguya had taken them all into an alternate dimension. A dimension which began crumbling around him under the destructive power of his runaway technique. Even after blinking away the Renegan, the black sphere continued to grow in size, consuming everything around. Naruto had resigned himself to his impending death. In fact, he welcomed it. By that point in the war, his belief in a higher power or an afterlife was non-existent. After all, no benevolent god would allow such death and destruction to reign over its creations. With that, a heavy sorrow had befallen him in his dying breaths, because even in death, he could not find peace knowing he would never see his loved ones again. There would be no afterlife for him in which all of his friends and family were waiting for him. There would be only darkness, an infinite nothing. He would simply cease to exist. No more suffering. That was his only solace, but he was never so lucky. Now, Naruto was reconsidering his notion of a deity, because it was almost as if one had taken to spiting him. In place of an endless nothing, he found himself very much alive. Naruto callously pushed the woman off him, feeling his body aching as a result of yet another in a growing list of failings. If he were to lift his shirt and channel his secondary source of chakra, his status as Jinchuriki would not appear. He lost Kurama much earlier before his final confrontation with Kaguya, and he certainly felt it. He was somehow frozen for who knows how long, and his body reminded him of that fact. As a result, he no longer healed in the way he used to, and he had the scars to prove it. Naruto grunted as he stood and looked around the room to see much he could not understand, a rusted sky above him with concrete flooring beneath. He frowned in annoyance. He didn't like taking the memories of others for many reasons, amongst the top being the confusion in understanding. Naruto understood most of what the objects surrounding were, and to some extent, what purpose they held, limited to the woman's own understanding. The knowledge he extracted from the woman was of an entirely different existence than his own. Naruto knew he should feel concerned by this revelation, and he was to some extent, but for some reason or another, his empathy was near non-existent in that moment. He felt empty, numb. Even if he could return to his world, or time, whatever the case, he didn't have a semblance of an idea on exactly how to do so. In Kaguya's dimension, reverse summoning had failed. It was worth the attempt, but for the moment, he did not have the chakra for the technique. Not that there was anything to return to, Naruto lamented. Konoha, along with the other hidden villages, had been destroyed. Everything he knew was gone. Naruto glanced down at the woman and pondered on her final memories, not of the death of her husband or even the disappearance of her daughter. It was horrible, certainly, but greatly overshadowed by the massive explosion in the distance before she was frozen. The humans of the current time or world were limited in strength physically, but they more than made up for it in their weaponry. In his opinion, the atomic bomb was a truly amazing and horrifying weapon of mass devastation. If he were to make a comparison, The only technique to possibly match the atomic bomb in destructive power would be a fully powered tailed beast bomb of about 5 tails in strength and above. Impressive to say the least, but trouble for its after effects. Radiation, it seemed, was as harmful as residue-tailed beast chakra to everyone but the host themselves. Only nuclear fallout seemed to linger for far longer and with much worse after-effects, including no prejudice. It affected everyone and everything. Naruto didn't much like the idea of living the remainder of his life in a hole, miles underground. The concept itself was foreign to him, and even then he realized the problems it presented. Finding food and water were currently his top priority, presenting him with a conundrum: either die of dehydration below, or potentially of radiation on the surface above. Neither seemed particularly ideal. What happened? Miranda groaned as she held her head. He was admittedly surprised she lived through the extraction, considering what had befallen the previous victims of his nameless technique. Perhaps, Naruto wondered, it was a side effect of his extremely low reserves. You fainted. Miranda jumped at the sudden voice, gruff and monotone. She didn't know whether to be happy or weary of her fellow survivor. She decided the latter was the most prudent option, considering she could not remember what had caused her to lose consciousness. His emotionless visage, despite his youth, was also troubling. Who are you? Miranda asked as she struggled to her feet. Naruto, he answered promptly. Naruto? Miranda struggled with the name. Naruto almost rolled his eyes. Yes, oh, well, I am Miranda, Miranda Fox, she introduced herself and extending her hand. Naruto glanced at the offering before reluctantly taking it. Without further interaction, he began to walk away, only to realize the woman was following close behind, looking at him like a lost pup. He stopped and looked at her. What are you doing? Naruto asked. Miranda was momentarily confused by the question before she quickly became confrontational. Listen, Naruto, I don't know what's going on here, but we should stick together until we can figure a way out. She paused, her courage suddenly failing her. My daughter, they took her and killed my husband. I have to find her. Outside? Naruto questioned. Do you think that'll be a good idea? The radiation might kill us before long? Miranda found herself at a loss at the possibility she had yet to consider. But Samantha? They took her and I don't think they're still here. Naruto's eyebrows furrowed at the realization. He could recall the two people dressed from head to toe in what appeared to be protective clothing. A worrying sight, but the bald man who killed the woman's husband was clothed in what could be considered normal, unprotected clothing. Was it possible the radiation had since subsided to habitable levels? Your daughter, Naruto began slowly. What are you going to do about that? I am going to find her, Miranda declared without any hesitation. And how exactly do you intend to do that? Naruto pressed. I am not sure, Miranda admitted reluctantly, but I have to try. Those bastards are out there somewhere with my little girl and I can't just abandon her. She began to squirm beneath Naruto's piercing gaze. It was almost as if his bright blue eyes held her in place, and it unnerved her. His stare wasn't lecherous, as his eyes never once strayed from her own, and yet, it somehow felt as though he was penetrating her very being with just a look. Miranda soon felt she needed to say something, do something. However, before she could do anything, Naruto inclined his head slightly with a sigh. You're really set on finding your daughter, no matter what? He asked. Of course, Miranda affirmed. Then I'll help you. Miranda was taken aback by the declaration and its suddenness. He had just agreed to undertake a very large task with so little ease. That was after having almost immediately dismissed her. Considering his expression had yet to change from its default, it was hard to believe he'd so abruptly changed his mind. It was almost as if he didn't truly care about her situation, but rather had nothing better to do. Miranda may have needed all the help in the world, but it was his attitude, his calm. It didn't sit well with her, not at all. Just like that? She asked, doing nothing to hide her suspicion. Naruto sighed again. Do you want my help or not? Of course I do, but, Miranda trailed, unsure of what exactly she wanted to say. Look, you said it yourself. Survival is better done in numbers. Until we can find your daughter, you watch my back and I'll watch yours. If nothing else, we're in this together. Miles underground with no clue of just what the hell is going on, Naruto explained himself. Miranda was still not entirely convinced the young man was being completely honest with her, but she would take whatever help she could get. And did she ever need the help? She was, at the end of the day, a housewife with a degree in criminal law. Despite what insinuations the title could conjure, she didn't know how to fight or how to utilize firearms beyond a single lesson from her husband. Miranda wasn't sure what Naruto used to do before the war, but he certainly seemed the strong and silent type. His mannerisms and rather impressive physique beneath the blue vault suit reassured her of that. His behavior reminded her faintly of her husband's behavior in the months after being honorably discharged from his service in the army. Miranda was not fond of the idea of relying on a man not her husband for survival. However, it was glaringly apparent she had little choice in the matter. For the sake of her daughter, she wouldn't trust her safety in the hands of a complete stranger. Wait, Miranda began cautiously, did you have any family here? She realized the sensitive nature of her question but felt the need to know. No, his simple answer, devoid of any emotion, alluded to an effort to hide his sorrows. They must have perished in the bombing, Miranda theorized. I am sorry, and thank you, Naruto nodded. As the saying went, old habits were the hardest to kill. The more he listened to the woman speak, the more he began to sympathize with her. Naruto would offer his help until he had the strength to perform a reverse summons. If it succeeded, then all he could do was wish her the best. If not, he wasn't sure what he would do. So, what do we do now? Miranda asked. Food and water will be a priority, but first I need to make sure we're the only ones down here, Naruto explained. Makes sense, but I checked and everyone, well, they're all gone, Miranda lamented. No, I mean I need to make sure there are no threats to us, Naruto clarified. She had never once considered the possibility her husband's murder was still lingering around. With that, Miranda wondered how long she had been out since coming face to face with the vile man. What if they're still here? Miranda asked nervously. He had a gun. I'll just have to kill him, Naruto stated. All he lacked was an accompanying shrug of his shoulders with how casual he said it. Miranda was unsure of exactly how he was supposed to take that. What should I do? Miranda asked. Should I maybe wait here? Can't risk them finding you alone. Follow me and stay close, but be ready to listen to any instruction I give you, Naruto said. While he felt utterly exhausted and his reserves were bordering on being dangerously low, he was sure he could handle himself. He didn't have enough chakra to perform any speed-based techniques to get back to her should she be attacked. Despite his seeming callous nature, Miranda was now beginning to feel better about her agreement with Naruto, not fully comfortable for his vague reasons, but he seemed to know what he was doing. If nothing else, he certainly appeared sure of himself and took her safety into consideration. Until he proved distrustful, or until she learned how to take care of herself, she would work with the mysterious young man. She didn't have much of a choice otherwise. I understand. Lead the way, Miranda said. With that said, they began the exploration of the vault. Truthfully, Naruto was hoping to avoid conflict altogether until he was at least partially recovered and potentially even armed. He would rather not have explained how he was capable of doing what the people of Miranda's world considered impossible. Of course, he didn't owe the woman any explanations, but he highly doubted she would respect his privacy, and that was a headache he could go without for the time being. Something scurried along the wall as they rounded a bend. Naruto startled at the sudden screech so close to his ear. What the hell is that thing? Miranda asked as she did her best to hide behind Naruto without directly touching him. A giant roach? Naruto too was taken by surprise at the presence of the oversized vermin. It did not appear to have noticed them as it remained in place on the wall, its large antennae twitching every so often. Kill it! Miranda shrieked when it turned in their direction. Step on it. Somehow I don't think I can just step on that thing, Naruto commented. That was untrue. Even in his weakened state, he doubted the oversized insect could pose any real threat to him. However, despite having lived in poverty for half of his life and coexisting with such insects, Naruto hated bugs and was admittedly unnerved by the size of its pincers. Unfortunately, he was given no choice in the matter, as it, along with a few other rivals, seemed to have set their sights on them. There's more of them. They're coming, Miranda cried. Just stay behind me, Naruto sighed as he readied himself. As the first of the oversized cockroaches scurried towards them, Naruto scanned the narrow hall for anything to aid him. Behind him, Miranda had taken some steps back but reluctantly stayed near him. Just as the first insect neared them, Naruto jumped up and grabbed onto a rusted pipe hanging loosely from the amongst others. It snapped easily as a result of his weight, crushing the insect on his descent. He swung the pipe hard to the right, killing the other approaching on the wall before kicking another away. It was a sickening task, but Naruto eventually killed off the final roach, leaving 8 large insects twitching about on the floor, now stained in a viscous brown substance. Well, that was gross, Naruto said as he inspected the now ruined pipe in his hands, bent and cracked in several places. It would be of no further use. He tossed it aside with a resounding clank and turned to Miranda, who held her nose in disgust. Why were they so big? It shouldn't be possible, right? She questioned in a nasally voice. No, it shouldn't, but somehow it is. Now, let's go before more come along, Naruto said. Okay. Miranda sighed in worry at the possibility. After you, I guess. They continued on, encountering their first closed door. Miranda observed Naruto's mannerisms and wondered why he chose to slam his fist on the release instead of simply pressing it. Though ever cautious, he seemed to step into the unknown with no visible hesitation despite just having encountered monster mutations. Miranda once more found reason to wonder just who Naruto really was. The door opened with a groan to reveal a living quarters. The small room was lined with cots, accompanied by rusted footlockers. Naruto immediately set to searching while Miranda was occupied staring at a set of remains on two of the beds, lying next to one another. Miranda, Naruto's firm voice helped break her morbid fascination. Check the boxes for anything useful like water or a weapon. Miranda only nodded and did as she was told. Meanwhile, Naruto himself approached the remains himself and reached for the baton in its skeletal hands. He noticed signs of damage on the bones, indicating they must have been eaten by the large insects. That'll be useful against the cockroaches, right? Miranda asked. Should be, Naruto said as he extended the baton to its full length before retracting it again. He placed it in one of the pockets of his vault suit and continued searching the room. Let's just hope the cockroaches are the only thing that be mutated. Naruto did not like the thought of facing giant spiders roaming about. Miranda made a frightened noise. Did you find anything? He asked in an attempt to distract her from horrifying machinations. Not yet, but there's a few I still have to check, Miranda called back. Altogether they found a single bottle of water and nothing else of use. Naruto called for a short reprieve before continuing their search as he himself was still reeling from using his eyes and his encounter with the creatures. That worried him. I don't know about you, but I sure am thirsty, Miranda commented as she seated herself at his side on one of the cots. Just drink slowly, Naruto advised as he handed her the bottle. Why? Miranda asked as she struggled to open the plastic bottle. Because, Naruto accepted the bottle from a sheepish Miranda, opening it before continuing. You haven't had any fluids in your stomach for who knows how long. You could get sick if you try and drink too fast. He gladly accepted the remaining half of the water after she had her fill, though he suspected he would have liked to drink more. He was certainly still feeling dehydration ail him. My whole body's sore, Miranda complained as she laid back on the bed with her hands on her own hips. She tried stretching her back. Naruto said nothing as he occupied himself with their next course of action. So, she drawled out, feeling the silence becoming too heavy for her liking. What did you do before the war? That is if you don't mind my asking. I'd rather not talk about it, Naruto replied quickly, the empty plastic bottle in his hand crinkling audibly in his clenched fist. Miranda noticed this in an otherwise quiet room and quickly decided the subject was better left alone for the time being, although his lack of answer, while understandable, did nothing to quell the unease the stranger sitting beside her wrought. Here, Naruto offered her a pair of black shin guards that he found while rummaging through the footlockers, so the roaches don't bite your shins. I am assuming that's where they're likely to bite first. Thanks, Miranda muttered, feeling once more his opinion of him sway, if ever so slightly. The other rooms within the vault were similar in design and function as the ones they cleared before. Some even contained more cryostats pods, though unfortunately they found no one else with life. The rad roaches, as Miranda had taken to calling them, were scattered throughout the vault, though certainly not a life-threatening creature. They did prove to be nimble and frustratingly persistent, as Naruto discovered. They eventually stumbled upon a kitchen they very little in terms of food. Boxes of uncooked pastas and cans which contained little more than rust. They had managed to find a couple of bottles of water within a hidden compartment inside one of the cupboards. As thirsty as they were, both downed the water with ease. After the mess room they came upon the overseer's office located right near the exit of the vault. As Miranda rushed to the bottom in an effort to open the vault, Naruto took that moment to inspect the gun he found beneath the remains of the man who must have been the overseer himself, if the flaking silver plaque on his desk was to be believed. Noticing a hole in the top of his skull, Naruto crouched down beside the overseer and looked to the rusted ceiling above, finding a small bullet indent above. He used to be of the belief suicide was a coward's escape. At least that was until the war began. Then it was just as much a constant as being murdered by Kaguya and her forces. Naruto had come to learn that very few people ever found comfort in the possibility of death. It was merely a desperate means to an end, like being caught in a burning forest with no escape but into a ravine. There is no escaping the blaze and the fall would mean certain death. In such a situation, many chose brevity over a slow tortuous end. The flames at his own back pushed Naruto forward, finding Miranda tinkering with the vault terminal, frustration quickly mounting judging by her increased use of words safely synonymous with curses. Darn it. It's not opening, Miranda cried as she tapped away at the keys harder than necessary. A voice warbled something indiscernible in response to every attempt but nothing else occurred. What does it say? Naruto asked calmly as he looked down to the remains of a pair of scientists, one of which had an odd-looking device attached to his arm. It's asking for administrative access requiring a pip-boy. Where are we supposed to get a pip-boy of all things? Miranda grumbled. Is this a pip-boy? Naruto asked, shaking free the radius that remained attached to a piece of cloth. He had a vague idea it was but he couldn't be sure. Miranda quickly confirmed he was holding a pip-boy and quietly questioned their luck and just as wordlessly hoped it would stay. Well, What are you waiting for? Put that thing on and get us out of here. I'd rather you put it on, Naruto said as he presented her the Pip-boy again, practically dumping it into her hands. I don't need it slowing me down. That answered her question before she could voice it. In the end, Miranda readily accepted the device. She recalled always wanting to own her own personal computer. However, being a housewife, she had no real use for a device normally reserved for those in positions that required task management such as doctors, scientists, and even the occasional businessman. They cost a high sum only a career in the aforementioned could afford. Miranda could never bring herself to ask her husband to indulge in such an unnecessary purchase. Alrighty then, how do you work this thing? Miranda asked herself so as to ignore the sinking in her belly. Naruto situated himself on the nearest railing and busied himself with inspecting the foreign weapon in his hands, idly listening as the woman fumbled with the device. He almost found it amusing hearing her mounting frustration reflected by the level in which the vulgarity of her curses increased. It's asking for a year now, Miranda said aloud. Hey Naruto, what year do you think it is? No clue, Naruto said, knowing his words had more meaning than she could know. Does that matter? Well, it's asking me for a date so, Miranda said, so just put anything. I am sure we'll figure it out eventually, Naruto said. Never mind, I think the computer has the date, Miranda gasped. No, that can't possibly be right. It can't be 2287. That a bad thing? Naruto asked, and judging by her outburst, it was. Some of her memories were beginning to grow hazy within his mind at the influx of new information, mostly the already vague, unimportant bits of information such as dates, names, and other such irrelevant thoughts. It was the year 2077 when I entered the vault, Miranda shouted, mostly to herself and in continued disbelief. Oh shit, Naruto was also surprised. Over 200 years frozen was a very long time to be unconscious. He wondered how long he was frozen, or how he even came to be at the vault in the first place. He refocused his attention and stood to his feet. There were far more immediate concerns to contend with. So much time, Miranda muttered sadly. She didn't have high hopes for any of her extended family or friends to have survived the nuclear war, but knowing so much time had passed was greatly disheartening. Miranda startled, slightly feeling a hand on her shoulder. I think we should get going. Your daughter's out there somewhere, waiting for you, remember? Naruto said. His tone was even and seemed to lack any audible compassion, but the gesture itself was enough for her. Miranda blinked away the tears that had accumulated and smiled at the thought of reuniting with her daughter. You're right, thanks, Naruto. Naruto wanted to comment about how awkwardly she continued to pronounce his name but decided such details were currently irrelevant. Instead he only nodded his head and gave Miranda room to continue with her task. Eventually she was able to get the Pip-boy working and was ready to raise the lift. Do you think we should wait a while or do we go now? Miranda asked. It was clearly apparent she was afraid to see what lay beyond. Naruto himself could not help the feeling of uncertainty churning away in his belly. They very well could be rising to their deaths, and yet, death was all that awaited them if they stayed. But Naruto was very much used to facing the unknown. The only way to know what's out there's to actually go, Naruto voiced. Besides, there's nothing else we can do here. We have some water but we'll die if we can't find food, and then there's your daughter. The longer we're here, the more time we waste looking for her out there. But my husband, Miranda hated her current thought process, but it was one she had to face. I want to bury him properly. And we will, just not right now. We need to really establish ourselves, yak now, find food and more water, maybe even a shelter, then we can move him. He's in the chamber so he should NT. Naruto paused and remembered causing the woman any more grief would only prove to be counterproductive. Your husband's body should stay well preserved until we can come back. But the chambers are offline, Miranda said, tearing up again. Naruto only barely restrained himself from sighing. He hadn't considered that, but hey, really didn't have the time to waste. We'll be back real soon, if not tomorrow. Again, we need to focus on staying alive ourselves, he reiterated. But we will come back for him, right? Miranda asked. Yes, she needed more than that, promise me, Miranda demanded. He was reluctant to give her more, but Naruto was mature enough to realize his life meant more than his word. He would keep his promise so long as it didn't endanger him. Thank you, Naruto, Miranda said as she activated the lift. Red lights began to flash and a siren blared as a metallic grinding filled the room. Both watched in wonder as the cog-shaped door rolled to the side and the bridge lowered, connecting the platform to the elevator. The process was rather slow, but eventually their way out was clear. I set it to auto-lift so we should hurry, Miranda said. They boarded the cog-shaped platform and looked up to catch a glimpse of the sky for the first time in at least 200 years. As the cog-shaped sky split open to reveal a light, 200 years worth of debris began to rain down on them. Reacting quickly to this, Naruto wrapped his arms around Miranda, forcing her into a huddle beneath him. He used his body to shield her. grunting when a particularly large rock collided with his back, around the lower left side of his ribs. It hurt far more than he expected, but it was not enough to disable him for the moment. Miranda was immensely grateful for his consideration in that moment and gasped, hearing him release a rather loud and pained grunt. She felt his entire body lurch above her own and saw the melon-sized rock rattle on the floor beside her. "Are you okay?" she asked worriedly. Another grunt was her only response. When the rocks stopped falling, Miranda tried to check on Naruto, but was held back when he simply put a hand up and shook his head, saying he was fine. Though worried, her attention was drawn to the sun that now brightened the platform. Both were equally relieved to know its presence was not shielded from them in a nuclear winter. However, their relief was short-lived when the elevator finally reached the surface, revealing the true cost of war. The landscape before them was charred and appeared to be clinging dearly onto life, while little grass grew presented in a sickly yellow color which blended drearily with patches of the graying of bushes and the occasional patches of green. Then there were the structures. What little remained of them standing bore nothing more than their skeletal innards, exposed through years of decay and dilapidation. Naruto tried gathering nature chakra to both feel for life, and in an attempt to accelerate his natural healing. Instead, all he felt was ill and immediately released his hold on the dying nature. He may not have been of this world, be it from another time or space, but even he felt burdened by the apocalyptic sight before him. A renewed sense of helplessness began to creep into Naruto, and no matter what he did to steel himself, he could not keep the feeling repressed. The world was dying. "Are you okay?" Miranda's soft voice was a welcome distraction. She noticed the disturbed look on his face, and it greatly concerned her. Knowing the seemingly hardened young man visibly shaken, frightened almost, made Miranda all the more nervous about what was to come. Then again, maybe she was expecting far too much of the man younger than herself. He was as much human as she, after all. Miranda had allowed herself to become presumptuous in the short time she'd been observing him. He handled the pistol he carried as though had done so all of his life as he dispatched the overgrown insects with relative ease. This painted him in a picture that may have been obscured by her circumstance. This realization only made her own reality all the more daunting. "I am fine," Naruto began after a moment. "I honestly didn't know what I expected. I knew it was going to be bad, but I didn't know it would be this bad." Miranda silently agreed with him. 200 years could help to either heal or destroy the earth under such radiation and circumstances. She did not have to know much of the invisible substance to understand just how harmful it was to both humans and nature alike. Naruto stepped forward and discreetly activated his eyes, looking for anything and nothing in particular. He spotted a gathering of homes in the distance, the neighborhood Miranda lived in before she entered the vault. He deactivated his eyes and turned to Miranda. "I see some homes down there. They seem to be in slightly better shape than anything else around. That's where I used to live. It's Miranda was plagued with memories of her pregnancy living in the suburbs, where they had moved to upon discovering she was with child. It was surreal seeing its current state of decay. It's called Sanctuary Hills. Well, go there first," Naruto decided. "See what we can scavenge in terms of food and water. We'll decide where we go from there." He began in the direction of the homes, prompting Miranda to follow after him at her own sedate pace. She was lost in troubled thoughts, as proven by the distant look in her watery eyes. Naruto felt a growing sympathy for the woman, as he knew all too well the despair of losing everything in such a short time. Though her husband and previous life were all gone, her daughter was still within reach. Or so he hoped. Naruto was well aware of just how cruel hope could be. But it wouldn't do anyone any good for Miranda to get herself killed as a result of her wandering mind. He could not allow her to be constantly distracted in a world unfamiliar. For both their sakes, he had to find a way to refocus the woman trailing numbly behind. Eventually, he would allow to grieve for all that was lost. For the time being, Naruto was ever vigilant as they continued their tedious pace, though he didn't realize just how lost in her own world she'd become until he had to save her from falling multiple times down the steep incline of the hill. Each time he did so, Miranda would utter half-hearted thanks but was lost in her thoughts. After descending the hill, they came upon a clearing in where the forest met suburbs. Naruto stopped his trek to further assess the situation. There were no immediate signs of life, but he couldn't be sure. Naruto didn't want to draw in any more nature chakra for how corrupted and sickening it felt. His previous attempt had left him feeling almost physically ill, and he didn't want to press his luck any further. Naruto decided to rely on his base survival skills alone. "We need to be careful around here. There's no telling what we might." Naruto found himself giving chase after Miranda. She was running in a full-on sprint towards what appeared to be a flying machine. If not for the memory of their home care contraption, he would have destroyed the machine long before she could have reached it. "Codsworth. I can't believe you're still here," Miranda called out happily. "And I am glad to see you in good health, ma'am." Codsworth sounded just as happy. "Oh, but where is Mr. Fox? I say, my scanners aren't what they used to be. Is that him over there? Did he do something to his hair?" Miranda glanced behind herself to Naruto, with pistol in hand. He was scanning the area in a constant sweep. They locked eyes for all of a moment, his hard stare confusing her for all of a moment before he continued with his watch. No, Codsworth, that's not Nathan. Her voice broke with sudden emotion. My husband, he's in a better place now. Codsworth, as a personal care robot, had installed into him a vast vocabulary and in many languages. Included in his base operating system were algorithms aided in deciphering any possible double meanings, referencing a vast library of pop culture and literature alike. From the look on her master's face and the tone in which she spoke, Codsworth knew there was little probabilities he would see his other master again, but there was still someone missing from the family under his care. What of the young missus? They took her, Codsworth, Miranda stated sadly, but the expression was replaced by determination. But I am going to find her. I see. Codsworth spun its mechanic arms about, then enough with the somber mood. Would Mrs. Fox and the gentleman like anything in the meantime? Some food would be nice, Miranda answered immediately. Unfortunately, I cannot provide that at this time, Mrs. Fox. Despite his words, Codsworth remained cheerful. I am afraid all the food within the home is terribly out of date and therefore unsafe for human consumption. May I interest you in some coffee in the meantime? I hear it has a much longer shelf life. No thanks, Miranda muttered uncertainly. I am going to talk with my friend to see what we can do about getting some food. Naruto heard everything and met her halfway. He was both awed and disturbed by the machine's seeming sentience. Talking summons were an oddity in his world, but one generally accepted as they were rumored to be the reincarnation of past warriors. However, seeing a man-made construct of metal with emotions was a very hard concept to accept, a creation of man beyond which nature intended. So, what now? Miranda asked. How am I supposed to find my daughter? I don't know where I'd even begin looking. It seemed she could no longer contain her tears as the reality of the situation continued to further cement itself as daunting. I think we should begin by looking for the largest city in the area, the man who took your daughter. His presence means there has to be other people out there. Someone out there has to know something, Naruto said. But what if we can't find her? Miranda began to lose her remaining composure. What if we never find her? What if she's not even alive anymore? Naruto felt awkward watching her cry. In fact, he didn't want to see her cry. It brought to mind memories he would much rather forget, but he could not ignore her despair. He acted before he truly realized what he was doing. Miranda stiffened, feeling a single arm wrap around her upper back. She looked up, wide-eyed, to see Naruto trying his best to look anywhere but back at her with the same expressionless demeanor she was growing accustomed to. It was obvious to her he was having a hard time dealing with her overwhelming emotion, and for some odd reason, it seemed to work. As awkward and out of place as the gesture was, it showed he did in fact care. In his own way, she smiled at him briefly, the gesture going unnoticed by Naruto before she lay her head against his chest, wrapping her arms around him tightly. He had to have been almost half her age, and that helped tremendously in taking comfort in the arms of a man not her husband. With that in mind, she proceeded to sob without restraint within his stiff embrace, letting out what she had been holding in since first meeting him. Naruto placed his pistol into his already brimming vault suit so he could hoist Miranda into his arms. Sometime along the release of her emotions, she had succumbed to her exhaustion. She was now snoring rather loudly, her eyes moving randomly beneath their shutters, indicating a deep yet restless sleep. He did not feel right interrupting her much-needed sleep by waking her. Sir, Codsworth saluted Naruto as he entered Miranda's home. She fell asleep. Where should I lay her? Naruto asked the machine. Right this way, sir, Codsworth said in a much lower volume. I just made the bed with fresh lining. Well, as fresh as can be, I suppose. The Mr. Handy robot led Naruto into the largest room, which he assumed to be the master bedroom. It was heavily deteriorated by time and weather, with the pungent stench of mold permeating the air. Despite this, the bed was in hospitable condition and with new sheets, as Codsworth said. He gently laid her down in bed as Codsworth held the sheets up. He covered her with the thin sheets and motioned for the robot to follow him into the living room. Watch over her, he instructed. I am going out to look for something to eat. But of course, sir, Codsworth saluted. His arms abruptly dropped as he floated slightly closer to Naruto. Sir? He almost sounded nervous. What? Naruto asked. He continued to feel unnerved by the machine's human-like behavior. May I have your name, sir? You see, it is within my protocols to refer to my master's friends in a respectful manner, Codsworth explained. Naruto Uzumaki, he said. Very well, Mr. Uzumaki. Codsworth saluted him again. It is my honor to make your acquaintance, and I would also like to take this opportunity to properly thank you for taking care of Mrs. Fox. Naruto only offered a nod of acknowledgement. One more thing. Mr. Uzumaki, Codsworth called after him. Do be careful while you're out. There are all manner of creatures in the area. Unusually large buggers they are, Ordinarily I leave them be as they tend to keep the riffraff out of our neck of the woods and they do ignore my presence altogether. However, now with the missus back, well, you seem capable enough to rid homes of the creatures yourself. I respectfully ask you clear the surrounding homes of the vermin. There are other people around? Naruto asked following another acknowledging nod. Not recently, no. I've seen a few people here and there over the years, though none ever stay more than a couple of days, Codsworth explained. This gave Naruto hope of a grander civilization. Did any of those people happen to have a child with them? He asked. None that I recall, Mr. Uzumaki, Codsworth reported. How long has it been since you've last seen anyone around? Naruto continued his line of questioning. Not too long ago, actually. There were a rather unsavory bunch of rapscallions whom camped out in one of the homes down the cul-de-sac. That was no more than 4 days ago, I believe, but worry not, they're gone now. I do routine sweeps of the neighborhood you see, Codsworth stated proudly. It was a start. Did you happen to see the direction they were heading? Naruto asked. No, I am afraid not, but I do believe I heard one mention the Museum of Freedom in Concord, Codsworth said. Concord? Naruto muttered the semi-familiar name aloud. It was a nearby town by his acquired memories, but they were already beginning to grow hazy in his mounting fatigue. Is that far from here? Not too far, Mr. Uzumaki, it's just northwest of here. Should NT be more than a half-hour's drive? Codsworth made a noise of sheepish contemplation. About a 4-hour walk? Putting aside the rather long trek, this new information mostly concerned him. Whoever it was that Codsworth saw, he didn't paint them in a favorable light. Knowing this, he couldn't risk straying too far from Miranda in the event some lingered. I'll be back soon. Don't let her out of your sight, Naruto reiterated, whatever that constituted to the robot. He had gone through most of the deteriorated homes closest to Miranda's own and his search had proven relatively fruitless thus far. The only item had discovered of use was a dull green military backpack, which he used to lighten the load of his pockets. Most of the creatures he encountered in his search appeared to be mutations of the common pests such as flies, and even mosquitoes, reminding him of his dislike for the latter. Naruto hated mosquitoes almost as much as he did spiders. Fortunately, he never encountered any spiders, and what vermin he did were easily dispatched by the weapon he was quickly growing to appreciate. He almost preferred his handgun over the kunai of his world. The projectiles traveled quicker, though that depended on just who was throwing the kunai. One of the few downsides to the weaponry was its disposable ammunition. He couldn't just pick up and reuse the projectiles once he fired them. His continued search led him to the remaining homes, where he managed to find canned chili and a couple of cans of black-eyed peas. Though neither seemed particularly appetizing, that was the least of his concern regarding the food. He could only hope they were edible, being well over a century past their expiration date. A noise outside of nature's own startled Naruto in the otherwise deathly silent environment. He readied himself, assuring he had a round chambered before carefully leaving the room he was in. Glancing through the living room window, facing the street, but he saw nothing. The home had only one window in the direction of the sound, and that being the living room window. Naruto knew better than to open the front door, further opening himself for a surprise attack should there be something more dangerous than overgrown bugs waiting for him. Rounding around back, Naruto exited the home from the rear door. Slowly and also cautiously, he circled the home until he reached the edge. Peeking his head around the corner, he found himself feeling foolishly relieved when he saw the source of the noise. It was a large and rather haggard-looking dog of a breed Naruto didn't quite recognize. It seemed to notice him, offering him a cheerful bark and a lopsided display of its tongue. With a wagging tail, the dog approached him at a leisurely pace, further showing its docile nature. Naruto kneeled to greet the dog, a small smile playing on his face as he petted its head and scratched behind its ears much in the same way he used to with Akamaru. This earned him more happy yips and louder panting. If he hadn't already cleared most of the homes, he would have been concerned with the noise it was causing. "You're a good boy, aren't you?" Naruto allowed himself to chuckle as the dog barked again, almost as if in confirmation. If only he had food to offer the poor creature. After giving him a short few moments of affection, Naruto decided to return to his task. As soon as his back was to the dog, he heard it growl. Naruto quickly turned his iron sights on the canine, only to come to the horrible realization it was not growling at him, but rather at a large creature which seemed to belong to the underworld itself. The monster was large, almost as tall as the nearby home it rounded. Its skin was a dark gray in color, rough and almost scaled in makeup. Its head was large with an elongated maw lined with a single row of long and sharp jutting teeth. Above its head were a pair of thick and curved dark horns, splitting multiple jagged dorsal spikes on its back, leading to a large tail. Its arms were outstretched and appeared just as powerful as the rest of the creature's musculature stature, its hands ending in 5-pointed pitch black claws. It was snarling right at Naruto, ignoring the now ravenous dog, clearly sensing he was the most immediate threat. He did not move, not even to exhale the breath hitched in his lungs. Naruto had faced worse monsters in human form, but that was in his prime. As he was now, the beast before him truly frightened him because his every instinct was screaming he was in danger. The dog, however, had no such thoughts of self-preservation. Shut up! Naruto released his own growl, low enough to be completely drowned out in the ones belonging to the dog and the beast. The monster erupted in movement. Oh shit! Naruto's eyes activated instinctively as he began to rapid-fire his pistol, unleashing 12 rounds directly into the monster's head. He could clearly see as each bullet struck and promptly crumpled harmlessly against the monster's thick skin, bouncing off as if they were mere pebbles. If anything, this only proved to further enrage the beast rather than harming it. He snatched up the dog and jumped away from the monster's charge. He landed on the roof of the nearby home but was offered no respite as the monster came to a grinding stop. It immediately lunged itself onto the same roof. It was rather fast and even more aggressive in its charge than he could have ever expected for such a hulking stature. What the fuck? Naruto leapt away again, keeping his hold on the yelping dog. The next roof he landed on had been well worn by time and weather, giving way immediately beneath his weight, sending both crashing inside. He fell on his back and through a wooden coffee table, landing hard. Fuck! Naruto groaned, feeling the area on his back where had been struck by the falling debris spike in pain. He glared at the dog on his chest. This is your fault. It had no guilt as it barked happily and licked his cheek. The beast growled again, drawing both their attention. It sounded to be on the retreat, which was not a good sign. Naruto pushed through his pain to rush out and located before it could find Miranda. He doubted Codsworth was capable of handling the monster that was admittedly giving him trouble. He paused at the door, seeing the creature roaming around the cul-de-sac, steadily making its way in the direction of Miranda's home. Naruto sighed and pushed the approaching dog back into the home with his foot and shut the door despite its whines of displeasure. The last thing he wanted to do was engage the creature again due to his current state. His previous maneuvers and the use of his eyes had taken their toll on his already dismal reserves. He estimated to have just enough in him to wander around, run if he had to. A physical fight was something he was hoping to avoid until he recovered. Now he had no choice. Naruto did not have to beckon the beast to catch its attention. He was hoping to use stealth as his advantage, but the dog put an abrupt end to that plan when it began to bark loudly and aggressively, pawing at the door. The beast was already charging at him before he could curse the imprudent dog. He actively disengaged his eyes and formed a base Rasengan in his right hand. He immediately felt the drain on his body but ignored it as the beast neared. Using the home behind him as leverage, he kicked off the building with as much force as possible, the brick crumbling beneath his feet as he met the creature head-on. To his misfortune, his Rasengan quickly dissipated as soon as it made contact with the beast's chest. He was subsequently backhanded aside, sending him crashing through the brick mailbox of a neighboring home. The hit and subsequent spin had Naruto feeling disoriented and in great pain. As he struggled to his feet, he was charged once more. Naruto let out an anguished shout as he was pinned against the home behind him. The beast's left horn had pierced clean through his right shoulder, while its right had managed to tear the muscle above his left shoulder. His own attack had managed to bore a hole in the monster's chest, which was now oozing obsidian blood, but it was not enough to kill it, instead enraging it further. His right arm was rendered immobile after having his shoulder pierced, muscle and tendons severed. Naruto desperately used his only working arm to parry the beast's wild claw strikes, but it managed to cut into his chest a couple of times. He then attempted to kick the monster away and almost had his foot torn into by its sharp teeth, its head movement further tearing into his shoulders. His eyes had activated again and he had no choice but to deploy a vastly underpowered push. It was enough to knock the beast onto its back. It seemed to have trouble scrambling back to its feet, giving Naruto enough of a reprieve to jump onto the roof of a nearby home, in which he made sure to land on the very edge in order to avoid any weakness in the structure. He landed on his feet but immediately fell to one knee, his right arm swinging uselessly at his side. Blue bled back into his eyes as his vision began to blur. In addition to the hole in his shoulder, his chest and right arm now bore multiple burning lacerations. His vault suit left in little more than tatters. In that moment, Naruto came to the grim realization that he may very well die if he was not careful. On some level this was always apparent, but to die to a mindless beast of all things, no matter how intimidating, was a major blow to his pride. He did not kill a goddess, only to die to a mutation. Beyond his fractured pride, Miranda's own gruesome end briefly flashed in his imagination, and it spurred him to his feet, a matter he didn't give too much thought as he prepared himself. Even if it did kill him, he was determined to kill the monster before it could hurt her. It was only a matter of exactly how he was supposed to accomplish that, though he wasn't given the time to strategize as the sound of shattering glass reached his throbbing ears. The dog had crashed through a window and out into the fight, barking viciously at the monster, which in turn roared back in response, becoming its current focus. Fucking dog. He pulled at the remnants of his chakra to summon a clone which stayed behind as he leapt down. Naruto landed atop the charging monster, forcing its head into the ground with a crash before it could reach the dog. He pulled at the bottom of the monster's jaw to keep it from biting, pulling it back with its every attempted swipe of its claws. It growled and swiped at him, but he used chakra to stay on its back and its arms could not reach him as he desperately fought for time. This doesn't feel right, his clone warned him, indicating it had served its purpose. Naruto ignored the warning and dispelled his clone, feeling the nature chakra it gathered flood him, followed closely by an overwhelming sickness, but he pushed through the concerning feeling and used his advanced strength to pull the beast's head back while forcing its neck down with his foot until something snapped. The monster fell with a crash, immediately still. Naruto stumbled off its back and immediately purged the remaining nature chakra within him by summoning as many clones as he could. Having performed the technique so often, he was able to do so without the use of hand signs. However, he realized something was horribly wrong when every one of the at least dozen clones looked like the ones he would conjure before he learned the shadow clone technique. Despite this, he was successful in ridding himself of his remaining nature chakra, but the sickness remained. Naruto vomited before promptly falling onto his back, the world swaying around him. The dog continued to growl at the beast, biting its horns until it confirmed it was in fact dead. After sniffing at it for a short while longer, it approached Naruto's sprawled, barked happily once again and licked his face. Naruto closed his eyes, his adrenaline having run its course. He didn't even have the strength to push the dog away. Its breath foul. Some time passed, and his pain only grew more apparent. He realized he had to get up, but somehow the bright sun above burned at his wounds almost pleasantly, prolonging his current pain in exchange of a much worse pain surely to come. He grunted and rolled onto his chest first. With great effort, Naruto moved himself onto his knees before finally standing. He began his slow trudge in the direction of Miranda's home, recalling seeing a liquor cabinet in her living room. He only hoped he could find a source of fire to cauterize his wounds, something he was already dreading, but he didn't have the sufficient chakra to force his own natural healing. "Mr. Uzumaki, what happened to you?" Codworth flew to his side the moment he entered the home. "Ran into something big." Naruto allowed himself to fall onto the sofa, his remaining strength finally failing him. "Is she still sleeping?" "Why, yes, sir." "Then keep it down. Also, get me some alcohol with the highest concentration, some clean rags, a clean knife, and a lighter if you can find one," Naruto instructed. He groaned as he ripped the remaining tatters of his vault suit to fully expose his chest and arms. "Right away, sir," Codsworth said in a whisper before quickly jetting away. Naruto forced himself into a seated position and shook off the backpack that somehow remained attached to him throughout his encounter and reached inside to grab a bottle of water. He drank some and poured the rest on his wounds to clean the excess blood. Just then the dog padded in and comfortably seated itself at his feet. "Asshole," Naruto looked at the dog, noticing it was male. "But I guess you did help, or at least you tried. If you're gonna keep following me, then I am gonna have to name you, aren't I?" The dog barked happily, as if to reaffirm the sentiment. "Well, you almost got me killed, but you were brave, loud, brash, and annoying. It's almost ironic," Naruto sighed. "Guess I'll call you Kiba. Also, shut up or you'll wake her." Codsworth flew in, holding what he was tasked to retrieve in a few of its arms, and quickly pointed another at the newly named Kiba. "Is that what attacked you, sir?" he inquired, the saw attachment on his arm whirring to life. "No, he helped me," Naruto muttered. "Are you certain about that, sir?" Codsworth asked. "Maybe, the alcohol." Codsworth, Naruto motioned with his working hand, wincing at the ache from his shoulder. "I do apologize, Mr. Uzumaki, but I could not find a fire starter, but I do have this," Codsworth said as he blew a concentrated jet of fire from one of his mechanical arms. "That works. Use the fire to heat the knife until it's glowing," Naruto said. Seeing where Naruto was going, Codsworth muttered some worried words but did as he was told. Meanwhile, Naruto poured the alcohol into his wounds and gasped as it burned his wounds. He was sorely tempted to take a drink, but it would only thin his blood, which was not advised with how much of it had already lost. He poured the remaining alcohol onto the rag to soften it. Tepidly he began to clean his wounds, groaning in pain all the while. "It's glowing, sir," Codsworth advised nervously. "Okay." Naruto grabbed the handle of the steel knife with the now bloody rag and inhaled sharply a few times before pressing the broad side against his biggest wound on his shoulder. Kiba whimpered and Codsworth gave the robotic equivalent of a wince with every wound Naruto cauterized. The process was arduous and very much painful, and by the time he finished, he was nearing unconsciousness, the room now filled with the horrid scent of burned flesh only he could find distaste in. Finally, with the gruesome task done, he dropped the knife with a clatter and laid back on the sofa, using his backpack as a makeshift pillow, and closed his eyes. "Mr. Uzumaki?" Codsworth began cautiously. "Are you alright?" "Yeah, I am." Naruto inhaled raggedly. "It'll be fine. Just watch over the house. Wake me if there's trouble," he mumbled before falling asleep. "Sir." Low militaristic music played through Codsworth's speaker system as he patrolled the home containing the two survivors of Vault 111. Miranda woke with a start, coming off a dream she was already forgetting, and found herself momentarily confused as to the familiarity of her surroundings. Her heart jumped when she realized she was lying in the very bed she and her husband shared a few short years, 200 years into a nuclear apocalypse. She sighed despondently and surveyed the room around her. What were once warmly colored walls were now in a state of advanced decay, which only served as a grim reminder of her reality. The sun's rays gleamed through sections of crumbled ceiling, showing a gray-tinged blue sky above. As the last of her mental fog began to clear, she recalled what led up to her waking up in her own bed again. Miranda felt shame burn at her as she realized, like a cliché right out of a film, she had cried herself to sleep in Naruto's arms. He was a young man just beyond the cusp of boyhood into adulthood, and yet, he was the one who remained strong, even offering to help find her daughter. Meanwhile, she threw a fit and cried like a child. There was no denying the gravity of her loss, but Miranda felt there was more she could do on her end to alleviate some of the burden of their shared situation. If she was to find her daughter and survive what was to come, then she would need to get her act together. Just as the thought crossed her mind, Miranda buried herself beneath her sheets when she heard an odd sound from outside. She held her breath and listened closely. It sounded as though something was circling her home, but she could not identify what it was. Recalling her latest self-declaration, while also hoping it was Naruto, Miranda peeked her eyes out from beneath her covers. Her eyes were glued to the window, which was partially obscured by a set of faded and decaying blinds which scarcely obscured the rising sun. This loosely informed her of the time of day as she recalled how her husband and how he always complained of the rising sun getting into his eyes on the lazy Sunday afternoons in which he liked to sleep in. Miranda shook her head, knowing that moment in time was not the most opportune to be lost within old memories. Most didn't have as much control over their minds as they would like to believe, and she was no different. Unfortunately, such pleasant memories did nothing to quell her fear nor to distract her from the possible danger that lurked around. That's when she caught sight of what was frightening her as it passed by the window. Miranda almost wanted to laugh at how scared she had been, but she did allow herself to sigh loudly in relief. The object of her fears was none other than her caretaker, Codsworth. Although knowing her saw-wielding housekeeper, a function she had always questioned, was protecting her in her sleep certainly set her at ease. It would seem a mind at ease was a rare commodity, as yet another troubling realization struck her. All was quiet. Miranda surmised this to mean one of two things. Either Naruto was inside and either asleep or simply quiet, or he was out and about. The latter worried her for many reasons. Amongst the top scenarios were that he abandoned her because of her utter uselessness up to that point, or he was hurt or possibly even dead. She certainly hoped neither of the latter scenarios were true. Miranda realized it was selfish of her, but she didn't want Naruto to leave her simply because she could not guarantee her own survival. She would not fault him for doing so, but that didn't mean she would like it. Well, I won't know anything if I stay here all day, Miranda told herself in a failing attempt at self-motivation. She got out of bed, feeling nauseous and frail. Likely from the lack of food, and she was quite parched, but she decided to worry about herself later. Miranda made her way through the small hallway of her home, intentionally ignoring her daughter's bedroom beside her own, and was horrified when she found Naruto. He was motionless on her now blood-stained sofa. He was shirtless. The entirety of his torso was painted a grisly maroon, stemming from a multitude of horrid wounds across his chest and on both his shoulders. Sitting below him on the floor was a large German shepherd which was now baring its teeth at her in a vicious growl. For a moment Miranda thought the dog responsible for his current state of being and was ready to call Codsworth, but Naruto's next action gave her pause. "Shut up, Kiba," he groaned in a dry voice. The dog whined and tried to lick his face, but Naruto weakly pushed its snout away. A single bloodshot blue eye regarded her briefly before disappearing again. "Hey, Naruto. What in God's name happened to you?" Miranda shrieked. He appeared near death in his current state. "Ran into something pretty big," Naruto mumbled tiredly. "Took care of it, though. Listen, Miranda, I am not feeling good. I think I might be running a fever. I need you too." Just then he began coughing violently, dribbles of blood falling from the side of his mouth. Miranda felt absolutely useless, not knowing how to even begin to help him. "Okay," Naruto began after his coughing fit subsided. "I need you to get me some water from the bag." Miranda noticed the camouflaged bag beneath his head and reached for it. She pulled her hand away just in time to avoid the dog's ferocious bite. "Down, Kiba." Naruto lightly slapped the back of the dog's head without having ever opened his eyes. She was in awe as the large and very intimidating dog whimpered like a scolded pup and obeyed. It even attempted to please Naruto by rubbing its head against his hand, prompting him to pet the dog weakly in turn. Miranda was snapped out of her shock as Naruto erupted into another fit of coughs. She was pleasantly relieved to find more water than what they began with and retrieved 2 bottles. After opening one, she cautiously approached him, gently sliding her left hand beneath his head. her eyes locked with the protective glare of the dog as she did so. Naruto felt relief wash down his throat as Miranda slowly hydrated him. He could not move much more than simply breathing lest he aggravate his unbearably painful wounds, many of which had since become infected, now sporting a sickly yellow color with pus lining the more deeper cuts. "What do I do? How can I help?" Miranda's voice quivered. His wounds looked much worse than she initially assumed, and she had no indication as to how to treat anything beyond a common cut. Unbeknownst to Miranda, Naruto was of a similar thought. He always had Sakura, Kurama before her, and his own innate healing capabilities to tend to his wounds. His only real knowledge of medicine stemmed from a single academic course in battlefield triage, which was why he knew to disinfect his wounds with the alcohol and cauterize them shut. However, this was only a short-term fix to keep a person with life long enough to receive proper medical care. That did not seem likely given the circumstances. How he wished to have followed in Sakura's footsteps in more ways than just a love-struck pup. "Go get Codsworth," Naruto said. "Codsworth," Miranda immediately shouted for the robot. "I said go get him," Naruto groused while holding his pulsating head. "Oh, I am so sorry, Naruto," she said in a whisper. Naruto said nothing as Codsworth jetted into the home with his saw arm spinning and flames blazing. Having heard her panic summons, he powered down his saw and immediately extinguished his flames once he assessed there was no immediate danger. Codsworth made a sound vaguely reminiscent of someone clearing their throat. "How may I be of service the fine morning, ma'am?" "I don't know," Naruto said. "Do you have any medical features?" Naruto asked. "Perhaps not as advanced as my medical counterpart, but I am equipped with a basic body scanner, as well as an extensive knowledge of common home remedies and emergency response care," Codsworth proudly stated. "Can you help Naruto?" Miranda remained frantic. "I do believe I can try," Codsworth said. "That would have been nice to know yesterday," Naruto muttered, doing nothing to mask his annoyance, mainly at himself for not having asked. "But Mr. Uzumaki, you did everything I would have suggested with so little to work with, although it appears that you may need some antibiotics to avoid infection and rest to recover. If you would like, I could run a bodily scan on you now," Codsworth offered. "Do it," Naruto answered. "Uzumaki? Naruto, is that your last name?" Miranda asked. "Yes," Naruto replied promptly. "Why didn't you tell me?" Miranda asked with a frown. "Does it really matter?" Naruto ground out, feeling his ire rising. His pain was constant with every breath, which reasonably extended to words. "You told Codsworth your last name but you couldn't tell me?" Miranda asked, feeling truly offended at his dismissal. "Look, I don't see why you are making such a big fucking deal about this, but if we're talking about names, it's Naruto, not Naruto." Naruto snapped. He opened his eyes fully to address the increasingly annoying woman. "Well, excuse me if I can't properly pronounce your weird name, and in case you didn't know, it's customary to give someone your full name when someone gives you theirs. You only gave me your first name, Naruto." Miranda bit back, putting special emphasis on pronouncing his name correctly. "What the hell are we even arguing about?" Naruto asked. He was growing increasingly annoyed by the ridiculousness of her negging. "We're arguing about the fact you gave your full name to a robot but not me," Miranda said, pointing at a slowly retreating Codsworth. She was frustrated by his apathy because to her, it was as if he was dismissing of her very feelings. "Why the hell would I need to tell you anything?" Naruto asked, having reached the end of his thinning patience. "Because we're in this together, Naruto. I am your partner," Miranda finished, almost shouting. "My partner?" Naruto growled. Her volume caused a sharp pain behind his eyes. "How can you say you're my partner when you've done nothing but cry and annoy me?" Miranda physically recoiled and took a step back, her eyes wide. Even Naruto was surprised by the venom in his own words but had grown to detest weakness, not physical so much as mental, and his own fortitude was beginning to slip. However, his intention wasn't to hurt her, as had clearly done. Her eyes began to water with hurt, a hurt he needlessly caused. "Miranda, I didn't mean that." He tried to express his immediate regret but she wasn't hearing it. "Codsworth, please take care of him and let me know if there's anything I can do to help. I'll be right back," Miranda said as she began for the door, wiping at her eyes while trying her best to ignore the vice on her heart that had just formed. "But Mrs. Fox, I highly advise you not leave the house by yourself," Codsworth called after her. "Stay here and help him, that's an order," she reiterated firmly. "Miranda, don't." He tried but she had already slammed the door behind her. "Fuck, I can't let her go out by herself." He attempted to stand but a debilitating pain coalesced from all of the injuries on his chest, leaving him unable to do little more than to seize in pain. "Stupid woman," Naruto muttered angrily. Codsworth would have reprimanded Naruto for insulting his master if not for the regret and worry evident in his voice. "Kiba, go follow her." Naruto tried in vain to command the dog, only to receive a confused tilt of the head in return. "Fucking useless mutt, just like the real one." Codsworth, go. He erupted in yet another fit of painful coughs, followed closely by a painful groan. Shit. I believe you require my assistance more than Mrs. Fox. At the moment, my proximity scanners detect the misses and nothing else. Rest assured, if I do detect any danger, I will waste no time in helping her, Codsworth reassured before beginning his scans. That jerk. What does he know? Miranda cursed as she angrily stomped her way through the neighborhood in search for food, water, and more importantly, medicine. In her angered state of mind, she paid no mind to the fact she entered homes once visited as a guest, her judgment tunneled in an effort to show Naruto just how useful she could be. His hurtful words aside, Miranda truly wanted him to get better. That way they could part ways. Going from house to house, she found fresh remains of more giant cockroaches and what looked like flies the size of a large bird but found nothing of use otherwise. Miranda began growing increasingly frustrated in herself as she slowly came to accept Naruto was right in what he said. Even now the mere sight of a crushed mutated roach was enough to make her want to run away. If she couldn't even deal with an overgrown insect, how could she possibly handle whatever so gravely injured Naruto? The thought had barely crossed her mind when she saw it. Miranda felt her stomach knot in absolute dread when she came across a monster the likes she never witnessed before. Even in the most horrifying of films, she was weary seeing such a creature but quickly realized it was dead as it was being picked away by numerous large black birds that were also unlike any shed seen. Against her better judgment, she began to cautiously approach the creature. The birds noticed her encroaching on their meal and hissed at her but also immediately scattered up and into the sky. As she drew nearer, she came to the easy conclusion that this hulking beast must have been responsible for Naruto's current state. The monster had horns and large claws both stained in what had to be Naruto's blood. This conclusion had Miranda's heart sinking into the icy pits of her stomach, a feeling amplified when she saw the dried pool of blood on the withered street and the faint trail leading in the direction of her home. How did he? Miranda trailed off in disbelief. When Naruto said he encountered something large, she didn't know exactly what she was expecting. Perhaps a wild animal or maybe another insect, and though she never once doubted Naruto's brief explanation of how he befell into such a sorry state, she never could have imagined had dealt with such a beast. Miranda simply couldn't wrap her mind around exactly how he managed to bring such a monster down. The gun, she noticed, was laying not too far off, the slide locked open having been spent all of its ammunition. She couldn't claim to know much about firearms, but even she doubted a gun of such a small caliber was capable enough of taking down the monster before her. Evidenced by the fact were no visible entry wounds indicative of gunfire. The only visible damage to the beast was a perfect circular wound in its chest that didn't seem deep enough to cause any real damage as far as she could tell, as there was very little of the creature's own dark blood. Despite her disbelief, he somehow found a way to kill the monster. Miranda found herself questioning just who Naruto was. "Sir, it appears you are suffering from acute levels of radiation poisoning," Codsworth stated gravely. Naruto remained silent for some time. "What can I do?" he finally asked. "I am afraid not very much without proper medical care," Codsworth said. Naruto felt dread pooling in the pit of his stomach. He didn't hold high hopes for finding a doctor 200 years after the end of the world. "Is there anything I can do to keep myself alive until I can find a solution?" he asked, fearing the answer. "There is a medication more commonly known as Rad-Away. I do not know the specifics of how it works, only that it is used to flush away the radiation from one's body. Unfortunately, I do not know where, if anywhere, you'd be able to find it. Additionally, there is a suppressant known as Rad-X. A more common medication but also just a temporal fix," Codsworth explained. It was disconcerting hearing the cure to his illness was likely beyond his reach. "Where might I find the Rad-X?" Naruto asked. "I am sorry to say but I wouldn't know, Mr. Uzumaki. I would advise searching for a pharmacy, but I cannot assure that any of the medication you may encounter will still be of use," Codsworth said. Naruto released a drawn-out sigh. "Okay, I guess I'll have to look for some Rad-X and maybe even a doctor, if those exist anymore. Until I do, I need to ask you a favor, Codsworth." "But of course, sir," Codsworth said. "Don't tell Miranda I am sick," Naruto said. Codsworth's multiple arms dropped. "But sir, I cannot in good consciousness lie to my master. Perhaps Mrs. Fox could." "I don't need her worrying about me," Naruto interrupted sharply. "She needs to focus on finding her daughter, and I need to make sure she's ready to face the world alone. If I can't be around to protect her, I can't do that if she's always fretting over me, dreading thinking I am gonna die." "But sir, the symptoms, it will not be long before you begin to display symptoms of radiation sickness. I am afraid death follows soon after," Codsworth said. "I'll figure something out," Naruto muttered, but even he didn't fully believe that. "Is there any way you could discreetly scan Miranda? If I was somehow exposed to radiation, then it's possible she was too." "Already done, sir. Whilst you were out on your search, I took the liberty of scanning Mrs. Fox." A little fatigue and hunger aside, I am happy to announce that the missus is in pristine health, Codsworth informed him. Good, Naruto sighed in genuine relief, then a certain thought occurred to him, why didn't you scan me before? Well you see, Codsworth sounded nervous. I tried, really I did, sir, but your canine would not allow me to approach you closely enough to run an accurate scan. Naruto stared at Kiba, feeling a mixture of pride and annoyance, who barked happily at sudden attention. He closed his eyes after having rolled them, missing as Kiba silently bared his teeth while Codsworth saw attachment began to slowly wind up. Go find Miranda, Naruto began, his eyes remaining closed. Kiba Herald protect me should anything crawl or fly in. There was nothing to be done should anything bigger come along. Right away. Codsworth halted his competition with Kiba and jetted out of the home, leaving Man and his dog. With Codsworth accompanying Miranda, Naruto was allowed time with his thoughts, his main concern being his current condition as he tried to understand how had become so dangerously irradiated. As far as he was aware, they were both frozen in similar pods and neither had eaten anything. He didn't believe the 2 extra bottles of water he drank would have so acutely irradiated him. There was the beast had killed. The creature was an obvious mutation. Unless Miranda somehow never learned of the existence of such a monster in her time, it was highly unlikely, but a possibility nonetheless. But if it was a product of radiation, direct contact with his own blood could have very well irradiated him. Again, although a possibility, Naruto doubted this to be the case. The monster only managed to get in a few strikes against him, devastating as they were. He didn't believe it to be enough to cause his sickness. With that possibility discarded for the time being, Naruto began to once more rake his memories for any other probable points of exposure, playing the events leading up to his predicament. Realization struck Naruto in the form of sudden remembrance. The sickening sensation he experienced when entering his sage mode the first time was more than grief of a dying world. He really should have known better than drawing upon the current world's twisted chakra to lace his own, likely sponging up any surrounding radiation. It was an initial mistake before it became a necessity when fighting the monster, and it could very well cost him his life. This revelation presented him with yet another handicap in a growing list while also exposing his heavy reliance on his augmentations. Not only was he without Kurama's aid, now Jiraiya's inheritance was beyond his use as well. Naruto tried to sigh but only managed to groan, feeling as though he was inhaling glass into his lungs with every breath. A cynical side of himself wondered if his current reality was a form of punishment for his many failures, but he quickly snuffed out that dark trail of thought. Thinking on past failures was a useless endeavor. That established, Naruto found nothing wrong in remembering the good times, because though few, there were good times. Naruto punctured his thumb between his canines and smoothed it over a small, unseen seal located on his left pectoral, right above the remainder of Sasuke's betrayal. The seal briefly became visible, a collection of black-colored calligraphy which erupted in a cloud of smoke. Naruto felt a welcome sense of relief blanket him seeing his most prized possession. It was a picture of himself and his wife, Hinata, in much happier times. Naruto allowed a small smile to come to his face. The gesture felt foreign after so long. The picture itself was taken on the day of their impromptu wedding, a small affair held unceremoniously right on the battlefield after almost 2 years of being lovers. There was nothing official about their union other than the asking of a simple question and her elated response, a declaration, really, that she was his wife and he her husband. The rings were supposed to come later, but they never did. Tears began stinging his eyes as he stared at her beautiful face. In the absence of hope, it was the memories of his beautiful wife that kept him moving forward. Their love helped him maintain a semblance of sanity through the most trying of times and into whatever unwanted adventure he now found himself in. Ghosts of her touches kept him warm in the coldest of nights before, while her sweet nothings were forever engraved into his mind, now dulling the ache of his wounds but not of his heart. It would do until he could see her again, or until he no longer felt anything, whichever turned out to be true. Guess he'll find out soon. Miranda heard her robotic housekeeper approaching well before she saw him, the chipper Mr. Handy humming a tune as he approached. Mrs. Fox. Codsworth greeted cheerfully. How is he? Miranda wasted no time in asking. Mr. Uzumaki is doing as well as he can, I suppose, Codsworth finished while trying his best to sound confident. Miranda found his audible reluctance odd and simply unnerving, especially when Naruto's health was in question. What's wrong with him? You know, beside his obvious injuries? She asked. Mr. Uzumaki displays signs of possible respiratory infection. Codsworth paused, as if to consider his next words, as well as a slight fever. He needs antibiotics and rest. What if we can't find any antibiotics? Will he be able to fight off the infection on his own? Miranda asked with trepidation. Mr. Uzumaki is a strong young man. She didn't like the way Codsworth voiced his response. It was almost as if he were speaking solely for her reassurance, but she didn't know if that was even possible. Were you able to find any food, ma'am? Mr. Uzumaki could really stand to benefit from a little nutrition, the housekeeper stated. Oh yeah. Miranda grinned and presented a worn beige shoulder bag containing a little over a dozen canned food items along with a small rusted box. Do you think you can open and cook these? But of course. Though if I may ask, where did you find all of this? I've personally searched the area in the event you and Mr. Codsworth cut himself off. Well, I simply could not find anything withstanding time or vandalism. Miranda caught onto what Codsworth aimed to say and her smile dropped. It wasn't her housekeeper's fault. No, her husband had already been on her mind because he was the one who helped her find the food. I remember him telling me about a man in his company that happened to live in our neighborhood. I forget his name now. Anyway, he was apparently already paranoid about the world coming to an end, even in his army days. Nate always figured he was stockpiling, and boy am I ever glad it turned out to be true. Found them in the attic. Miranda began sadly as she thought of her husband, but ended with a smile as pride once again reassured her. Knowing Naruto could potentially benefit from her discovery only added to her elation. Oh, and I also found these pills in this first aid kit, but I don't know what they are. Maybe you might know. Miranda presented 2 pristine white boxes from within the tin container, each with labels she couldn't begin to read aloud. In her opinion, words really should only contain so many letters. It didn't help neither gave a description of their intended purpose, only a long list of chemical properties and instructions for use. Oh, how fortuitous indeed, Codsworth cheered. Codsworth? Miranda asked. Ma'am, you've just found some antibiotics as well as, Codsworth stuttered. Some anti-inflammatory medications. Yes, that is correct. Will it help him? Miranda asked. Most certainly, Codsworth exclaimed. That's great. Miranda smiled before remembering she was angry at Naruto. I mean, good, yeah, let's get this to him so we can see who's useless. Codsworth had to speed up to keep pace with Miranda's light jog as they made their way back. Upon returning they found Naruto was asleep, drenched in perspiration despite the cool temperatures outside. Despite the sound she made, Naruto remained asleep, showing signs of clear discomfort in the furrowing of his eyes. His canine companion was loyally at his side, stirring awake at the sudden commotion. Kiba regarded them in momentary and lazy wonder before lowering his head down, rejoining his master in slumber. Miranda felt guilty for having disturbed both their rest. She quickly met Codsworth at the door and instructed he stay outside, knowing his thrusters could cause quite the ruckus from years of lack of maintenance. Her housekeeper recommended making him food before taking his medicine, so she tiptoed into the kitchen, grimacing every time she inadvertently caused pots to clatter or the floor creaked. Once back outside, she and Codsworth circled around the backyard to begin breakfast. Miranda was pleasantly surprised to find her patio furniture could indeed survive a nuclear apocalypse. As the salesman so boisterously stated, if a bit rusty, she supposed 200 years under the weather could do as much. I guess we're having corn and canned sausages for breakfast, or is it lunch now? Miranda looked up to the sun high in the sky, then to her pip-boy, brunch? I believe that term only applies if you're serving breakfast items for lunch, Codsworth added. Miranda shrugged her shoulders as she began cooking, a process which involved no real cooking at all. She simply had Codsworth hold and heat the pan containing the odd collage of food whilst she stirred occasionally. It didn't take long for the food to heat up, not cook, and was ready to serve. Her mouth watered, but her priority was helping Naruto. Keep an eye on things out here. I'll go help Naruto eat and give him the medicine, Miranda said. Miranda set the food in the kitchen counter, just out of reach of a very hungry dog who was already panting in hunger. She cautiously approached the very unapproachable man and lightly called his name 3 more times with increasing volume and worry before she decided to call for the only help available. Codsworth. Miranda called loudly, while she waited for her housekeeper to respond. She tested his temperature with the back of her hand, only to quickly withdraw it in shock. He was burning up, even more so than when she first encountered him in the pod, almost to the point of being painful to the touch, far beyond what humans should be capable. What is it, Mrs. Fox? Codsworth asked as he jettisoned into the home, appearing ready to protect her from whatever the threat. It's Naruto, he's burning up and isn't responding, Miranda said. Codsworth scanned Naruto. The medicine, Mrs. Fox, he needs it right away. Miranda fumbled in her pockets, her shaking hands making it difficult to find the medicine. Which is it? She asked. Codsworth already informed her of the dosage, but in her panic, she seemed to have forgotten everything. Both, ma'am, Codsworth calmly stated despite the situation. He needs 2 of each every 12 hours until the symptoms subside. After retrieving the tablets from their thin tin enclosure, she gently lifted Naruto's, grabbing hold of a bottle of water with the other, one by one, to avoid a choking hazard, fed him the pills. She was relieved he instinctively swallowed despite being otherwise unresponsive. What now? Miranda asked. You're going to have to clean his wounds, Mrs. Fox, or he won't get better, Codsworth advised. Miranda grimaced at the grisly sight and silently nodded in understanding. Once the final pill was downed, she rushed to the bathroom. There she managed to find a few stiff but otherwise clean towels hidden away in storage and returned. She saturated the smaller hand towel and laid it on Naruto's forehead. The larger towel she infused with proper antiseptic alcohol, also found within the soldier's home. The final towel of a similar size was soaked in pure water. What do I do now? Miranda looked to Codsworth for guidance. Clean his wounds, ma'am, Codsworth reiterated. Miranda held the towel in her hand, staring between Naruto and Codsworth. But how? It'll hurt him if I touch him. Hell be worse off if you don't, Codsworth pressed. I am sorry, Naruto, Miranda preemptively apologized. She pressed the towel to his largest wound on his shoulder and pulled it back to find only speckles of blood. I am afraid you'll have to be more forceful than that, ma'am. You need to get rid of the old clots so that you may properly disinfect his wounds, Codsworth advised. I am really sorry. Miranda's breath hitched through gritted teeth as she dabbed at his wound and twisted. She flinched when Naruto did, but aside from that jolting reaction, he didn't open his eyes. Once she was sure Naruto wouldn't wake and strangle her, she began to clean his wounds using the force necessary to clean away the infected scabs of skin with the alcohol-saturated towel. Pressing deep down into his muscle tissue, she finished by pouring clean water on his lacerations before dry cleansing them with a moist towel. Finally, Miranda was able to bandage all his wounds, some of the smaller lacerations with a multitude of regular-sized adhesive strips in a butterfly-like suture. The most prominent of his wounds, the 2 punctures on his shoulders, she covered using gauze and bandaged wrapped all around his chest, utilizing Codsworth's help in lifting Naruto when she couldn't, much to Kiba's chagrin. 3 water bottles, the entire bottle of alcohol, and 2 very bloody towels later and she was finally done. Thought it all. Naruto continuously writhed and groaned but never woke. This concerned Miranda, but after all was done, he seemed more at ease despite his persisting fever. Now what? Miranda asked as she allowed herself to fall in the nearby love seat, releasing an exhausted sigh. Now we wait, ma'am. We've done all we can for the moment. The rest is up to him, Codsworth said. Miranda laid down, feeling drained and nauseous as the stench of blood, her own sweat, and alcohol wafted directly into her nose from her no longer pristine vault suit. Her stomach ached in a reminder she had yet to eat, though she felt no desire to do so after such an experience. Ultimately, she ignored the gross resemblance cooked sausages had to raw flesh and ate, finding herself pleasantly surprised to discover the food was actually edible. It was by no means a delicacy in its simplicity, but she stomached it well enough. She made sure to save enough for Naruto and fed the rest to Kiba, who hungrily devoured his food. Meanwhile, Miranda fell back into the love seat once again. Her small frame fit well enough so that only her feet were resting on the arm of the seat. Eventually, the awkward position became too much, so she balled herself onto her side to fit comfortably. Despite having the exaggerated definition of a moderately comfortable bed waiting for her in her room, Miranda felt safer merely being in Naruto's presence, even if he was in no position to defend even himself, much less the both of them. It was an odd thought, but one she couldn't deny. Miranda would, however, justify part of her actions in that she needed to keep watch over him, should his condition deteriorate. She didn't end up doing a very good job at that, as she soon found herself drifting in and out of sleep. With every blink of her heavy eyes, they became much harder to open. Miranda fought valiantly against it, but in the end the slow and steady rising and falling of his chest and his constant breaths lulled her to sleep. Hours later, Naruto was the first to wake. The sun began to sting his eyes, forcing him out of his sleep. Beyond his annoyance at the intrusion of the light, he quickly noted just how much better he felt. His chest continued to ache with every breath he drew, but he could feel a semblance of his strength begin to return to him. A quick test reaffirmed his strength was more than just physical. He could feel his chakra building slowly but steadily within him. With it, his natural healing abilities began to take effect. Even now he could feel the dull burn of his regenerating muscles. Hearing a rather loud snort, Naruto looked over to see Miranda asleep on the smaller sofa. His line of sight revealed the work done on his chest as well as the pile of bloodied towels no doubt belonging to him. His gaze returned to the slumbering woman. Her mouth parted with drool pooling where her cheek was pressed against the cushion. Naruto hadn't realized he was scowling until he felt his own features soften. He felt like a fool for what he said to the woman. He was a shinobi fresh from war and she was a scholar and a homemaker. They were from 2 vastly differing worlds in more ways beyond initial implications. He was born into adversity and was molded by war. She only witnessed it from behind the television and in the safety of her home. Hearing the horrors of war from her husband did not equate to experiencing them firsthand. They were opposites in many ways. It was unreasonable to expect her to adapt so easily to the end of the world. He would take that into consideration going forward. Naruto felt a chill in the air, compliments of a breeze from the nearby broken window, and Miranda shivered in her sleep. With great effort he limped to her room to retrieve a blanket and returned to cover her with it. He smiled seeing her immediately grab hold of it in her sleep, balling further into herself. Thank you, Miranda, Naruto whispered and stopped himself short of reaching out to her, wondering what he was doing. Guess I'll apologize when you wake up. Naruto needed to change out of his blood-caked and tattered vault suit but knew better than to greet Miranda wearing her recently departed husband's clothes. The nearest home was only a few feet away, but after his encounter with the monster from the day before, he was cautious of what they could encounter next. He was also reluctant to leave Miranda on her own, and though he was recovering, a shadow clone was out of the question. Naruto wanted to conserve every bit of chakra he had should he have to fight another dangerous creature, or something worse. He was very much in the dark regarding the current world's mutations. He couldn't get Kiba to stay, but thankfully he was able to find Codsworth loyally patrolling the home, who revealed to him the reason behind his improvement. Miranda happened to find some Rad-X, as well as some antibiotics. He also learned Codsworth kept his word and Naruto was grateful for the robot's discretion as he was still far from being out of danger. A secondary scan revealed the radiation within him was still fatally high. Rad-X was a mere suppressant. No more than a momentary fix. However, it was a relief to discover that even after over 200 years, the medicine's efficacy remained. All he had to do now was find some more, and more preferably some Rad-away. After a quick rummage through the direct neighboring home, Naruto discarded what remained of his vault suit and was now wearing all he could find not affected by time and weather and was hating every moment of it. He returned to find Miranda awake, heating up the chili he found the day before. She almost literally dropped everything she was doing and ran to him, coming to an awkward stop before him, her expression troubled. Naruto suspected she aimed to hug him because her arms wide open quickly became wrapped around herself. You should be resting, Miranda eventually muttered. I had to find a change of clothes, Naruto said. It was then Miranda seemed to take notice of his new clothing. He was wearing a lime green button-up with equally blinding pink flamingos pattering the shirt. The humor ended there as he wore a pair of beige dress pants, but that wasn't enough to distract her from the stoic young man dressed like a tourist in a coastal state. I started on breakfast, Miranda announced, her few words warped with humor as she motioned towards the pot of food, turning to hide her grin. Despite her best efforts, she wasn't able to fully suppress the snorts which quickly became hushed giggles. Naruto rolled his but decided to allow her to have a laugh at his expense if it made her feel better. He was also never one to dance around a subject, one of the few personal traits the horrors of war hadn't taken from him. Thank you for taking care of me, Miranda, Naruto said. Miranda turned to find his expression was as serious as his words, putting an end to her laughter. I also wanted to apologize for what I said to you. I was in pain and didn't mean it, but that's not really an excuse. I should have taken it out on you, Naruto continued. She silently cursed Naruto for having disarmed her so easily. Despite her worry for him, she had compiled a list of possible comebacks to any of his claims, if only in her imagination. Miranda was given the satisfaction of seeing how the blonde writhed beneath her witticism, begging for her forgiveness, maybe even on his knees. Of course she knew she wasn't brave enough to openly say most of what she wanted to say, but the scenarios played out nicely enough within her imagination. However, hearing his words now, Naruto's face may have remained in its hard default, but there was a subtle yet genuine change in his tone. His voice was still low, just above a whisper with a masculine coarseness, only now there was a warmth previously absent. Naruto seemed genuinely apologetic and Miranda couldn't find any reason to remain angry at him. It's okay, Miranda sighed, it's not like what you said isn't true. I haven't exactly been a big help so far. I wouldn't say that at all, Miranda. I would have probably died if not for the medicine you found, and you helped clean my wounds. I could barely even breathe before. There's no way I would have been able to help myself. You saved my life, Naruto said honestly. Miranda felt oddly shy at his words. You would have done the same for me, and it's not like I can always stay behind and patch you up every time you get hurt, Naruto. Not that I don't want to help you, or that I wouldn't, but I need to learn to take care of myself too. I can't always just rely on you. She finished with some steam behind her words. I know, Naruto agreed calmly. That's why I am going to teach you how to defend yourself. You will? Miranda asked in momentary confusion. Her eyes lit up when she fully processed what he was suggesting. You will? She repeated louder yet. Naruto was aware that was where she was trying to lead the conversation before his offer. Seeing her large hopeful eyes shine in anticipation reaffirmed his belief. Miranda could be quite immature at times and it oddly didn't annoy him. Her enthuse and drive reminded him of himself in his childhood days. Yes. I wanted to start off by showing you how to shoot a handgun. When I am feeling a little better, I'll show you some self-defense techniques in case you find yourself without a weapon. We'll see where we go from there, Naruto explained. That's great. We can even start now. Miranda reached into the deep pockets of her vault suit and produced the gun she had retrieved earlier. I found your gun earlier and even reloaded it. See, I already know how to do that, and I also know how to aim too. Wait, don't. Her excitement got the better of her and she did what her husband warned her never to do. what Naruto was about to scold her for doing, and placed her finger on the trigger, accidentally pulling it. He quickly took the gun from her, dropped the magazine and popped the chambered round, catching it as it soared through the air. He returned the single bullet back to the magazine and set the gun down on the counter. Sorry. Miranda cupped her mouth, feeling embarrassment burn her. Naruto sighed seeing what was going to be his breakfast splattered on the floor, being eaten by Kiba. The pot was now ruined by a bullet hole and he couldn't help but feel he might have his work cut out for him. Or maybe not. Miranda surprised Naruto by proving herself to be a quick learner, if clumsy at times. A simple afternoon of target practice using whatever they could find to line up, and now she could accurately fire from a respectable distance. Moving targets were another matter altogether. To simulate as best as they could, Naruto had Miranda begin taking aim and firing whilst on the move, beginning at a walking pace. She increased the speed of her stride until she could hit an average of 6 out of 10 objects in a light jog. She still had much to learn but made great progress for how little time she practiced. I think that's enough for today, Naruto announced after she shattered the last empty Nuka-Cola bottle. Ah, come on, I was just getting the hang of this, Miranda whined. Watch, to prove a point. She fired off 3 shots in near rapid succession, only managing to hit one of the 3 intended targets. Miranda chuckled in embarrassment at her failed attempt but was relieved to see Naruto showing no signs of disappointment. Not that he displayed any real expression other than his default, but he at least wasn't frustrated with her. Naruto, as it turned out, was a very patient teacher. Much more so than her husband when he tried and failed to show her how to use a handgun. Miranda only obliged him knowing how much firearms played a role in his life. Otherwise she would have cared for learning how to handle one, and it was something she now regretted. In that moment she had her reasons. They had worked so hard to get into the sanctuary suburbs where crime rate statistics were non-existent outside the occasional spousal spat, which the two proceeded to get into once it became apparent Miranda wasn't taking the lessons all too serious, a mistake she would never make again. Naruto noted the hand she was using to hold the gun was trembling from overuse. There's no need to overexert yourself. You're making great progress, but we can't keep using up our bullets. That, and I don't want to keep making too much noise. Codsworth mentioned a few people camping out in the area a few days ago. They were on their way to Concord, but I'd rather not risk it. Concord? There are people in Concord? Miranda asked. Yes, but then what are we waiting for? They may know something about my daughter. Hell, they may be the ones who took her. No, Naruto emphasized the word heavily. Neither of us are ready to travel yet. I haven't recovered and you're still learning to defend yourself. It would be irresponsible to go now. We'll only manage to get ourselves killed. But my daughter, Miranda stated with a frown. We won't find her if we both die. Miranda, you have to think with your mind, not your heart. Naruto's face and tone softened back into their default. We will find her. Miranda briefly looked down and away from him. As hard as it was to accept it, she understood what he was saying. Naruto knew what he was doing. She trusted in that. Hey Naruto, can I ask you a question? She didn't miss the subtle shifting of his eyes along with the stiffening of his posture. It was obvious he didn't like personal inquiries. Yeah, go ahead, Naruto said, and she appreciated he was willing to talk with her. That thing you killed back there, that monster, how did you do it? Miranda asked the question that had been on her mind for some time now. Not even in her wildest imaginations could she think of a weapon with the ability to punch such a clean, round hole through such a creature. You saw it then? Naruto acknowledged. He disposed of the monster's corpse as soon as he was able so as to avoid any further questioning, but he suspected she had already seen it. He foolishly left the gun next to its body and it had been lying near the center of the cul-de-sac. Yeah, Miranda trailed off as she nervously held herself. In that moment Naruto decided there was no benefit in keeping his abilities a secret. Miranda would inevitably witness them and he couldn't have her freezing in either awe or terror because of his actions. She needed to know and understand what he was if they were going to survive alongside one another. With his mind made up, Naruto was not looking forward to the explanation less, the questions bound to follow. I am going to be honest with you, Miranda, like you. I am not from this time, maybe not even from this world. Naruto began slowly. He was trying to gauge her reactions so as to find the best way to explain himself in a way she would believe. He was mainly hoping he wouldn't have to put on any demonstrations. What are you trying to say, Naruto? She asked. I don't know how I ended up in that vault. I only know that this isn't the world I know, and I don't mean because of the nuclear war. Naruto tried his best to explain without having to reveal too much. So, you're saying you're from another world or time? Miranda reiterated in clear disbelief. That still doesn't explain how you were able to kill that thing because I didn't see any bullet holes, just the one in its chest. She was observant, that much was good. Miranda, I am a shinobi. Naruto decided to be even more direct. Shinobi? Miranda tried the word slowly, drawing from her memories for any indication as to what that was. Yes, shinobi are special ninja from my world with superhuman abilities. That's how I was able to kill that thing. Ordinarily I wouldn't have even gotten hurt, but my chakra's still very low, Naruto explained, already knowing her follow-up question. Superhuman ninjas, chakra. Naruto, what are you talking about? Miranda asked, now thoroughly confused. Naruto understood her. What he was saying must have sounded like near nonsense, and he was never adept at explaining himself, so he decided to prove himself by example. Chakra is a shinobi's life force as well as their source of energy used to perform techniques such as this, he said as he raised his right hand and formed a base Rasengan. Using the chakra belonging to one of the most powerful beings in existence motivated him to learn a semblance of control. After Kurama's extraction, it became a necessity. While his reserves were still among the highest of his world, Naruto could no longer afford to be so reckless with his power. The Rasengan was a technique built upon control. He could create one with little draw on his chakra, the takeaway being a reduction in the technique's power. Miranda's eyes doubled in disbelief. Many questions flooded her mind as she studied the beautiful glowing orb. However, she simply couldn't put to words any of her thoughts and instead allowed herself to become entranced by the swirling ball of cerulean light. She reached forward to touch it, but just before she could, the ball dispersed in a small burst of air, ruffling her hair and breaking her from her semi-trance. Miranda blinked a few times, questioning whether what she had just witnessed was real or not. What was that? She asked. That was called a Rasengan, my favorite technique. It's capable of destroying most matter, which is why I had to end before you lost a finger, Naruto explained. Impossible, Miranda said as she held her finger in the palm of her opposite hand, as if to confirm she had not lost it. I can understand why you would have a hard time believing it, but it's the truth, Naruto said. No, Miranda shook her head. I mean, you can't destroy matter. It can't be destroyed or created, only reshaped. I learned that in school, she offered. Good to know, I guess, Naruto muttered dryly. Miranda hummed, taking his words at face value in her wonderment. Is that why you were able to heal so fast? I mean, you weren't doing too well just yesterday and now you're up and walking. I can't tell you for sure how the shinobi and kunoichi from my world differ from the humans of this world, Naruto admitted, but yes, I've always healed faster than most. What's a kunoichi? Miranda asked, struggling to pronounce the word as with the other. A kunoichi is the name referring to a female ninja. Shinobi are male, but the word is also used as more of a broad term for ninja, Naruto said. What do ninja do, actually? Miranda asked. Her knowledge of ninja began and ended with a single terrible film she'd watched, and since forgotten, with Nathan early in their relationship. Many things, Naruto began, reluctant to give the full range of duties, but we were mainly our village's military forces, similar to soldiers. So you're telling me women were allowed to fight alongside the men in war? Miranda asked excitedly. Yes, Naruto confirmed, taken slightly aback by her reaction. Girl power, she whispered, almost squealed, to herself. Yeah. Naruto felt the corner of his lips twitch ever so slightly. Now, with that out of the way, we really should. What else can you do? Miranda asked with a slight turn of her head and the wonderment of a child. Naruto sighed, knowing it would be a very long evening. For the following 2 days, Naruto worked on training Miranda in the capacity his injuries would allow. This consisted mainly of a few simple self-defense techniques and continued weapons handling. When they weren't training, the two scavenged the surrounding homes further. It took all of an afternoon to survey every remaining home within the small suburb, their search proving fruitful in finding necessities such as more food and water, as well as another handgun for Miranda to use. Naruto acquired some more appropriate clothing in the form of a simple black button-up. It didn't offer anything in terms of protection, giving him the idea of constructing armor. They would both need it, after all. In his current state, Naruto couldn't use his superior speed and was susceptible to getting hurt. His lack of sage mode left him vulnerable. Fortunately, Miranda knew how to sew and offered to try to create some armor. So all they lacked was material. The monster's razor-sharp claws aside, the vault suit appeared to be composed of versatile and resistant material, so plans involving the suit as a base were in the making. Nearing the end of the 3rd day, Miranda's impatience began to boil over, and Naruto was of a similar disposition. He could now run at a moderate pace and fire his gun with minimal pain. Time was truly against them if they wanted to find Miranda's daughter. Something that had been weighing on Naruto's mind was how he used his eyes to invade her privacy in the worst of ways. He was relieved shed yet to inquire as to how he knew most of the workings of her world, and how he knew English in general, and was dreading the moment in which she made the connection. As to his illness, his supply of Rad-X was beginning to run dangerously low, with only a 3-day supply remaining, and it seemed as though the radiation was somehow keeping his chakra restricted. After the first few days, his reserves ceased growing at what he estimated to be 1/10 of his full potential. This was more than a reasonable cause for concern. A single shadow clone would use more of his reserves than he would like, and his eyes more so if he used their abilities. Normally he would feel little to no drain if using his eyes to view further distances or objects in greater detail. His chakra usage increased when he tried to use them for combat applications, as he came to learn when watching Miranda shoot. He used his eyes to see how they perform in tracing a speeding bullet should one take a turn in his direction. The legendary Renegan did not disappoint. He was able to successfully follow the bullet on its journey from the barrel of Miranda's gun to the empty Nuka-Cola bottle, seeing in great detail the directional burst of shattered glass. How he sympathized with Kakashi now. In his intrigue he failed to feel the drain on his chakra until he was on his knees, gasping in an attempt to regain a steady breathing rhythm, all while trying to convince Miranda that he was not dying, at least not in that moment. He could no longer use another of his favored techniques so liberally. In light of his recent discoveries, Naruto was beginning to believe all of his fortune was spent in his childhood and all that remained was an ever-growing streak of misfortune. Because of his radiation poisoning, he was left severely debilitated and heavily reliant on firearms until he succumbed or triumphed against his ailment. Until then, making the best of a bad situation was proving more difficult than he wanted to deal with. Naruto decided they would be leaving Sanctuary early the next morning. He had no other choice if he wanted to live. "Naruto," Miranda softly called out. The two were currently in the backyard of her home, making their final preparations for their departure the next morning. Naruto hummed his acknowledgement and welcomed the distraction from his detrimental thoughts. Miranda watched Naruto for a moment as he dismantled and reassembled the handgun many times over so as to better understand it. Truly she was fascinated by his ability to learn something utterly foreign so quickly, especially being a super soldier from another world. Despite his first demonstration, Miranda had her doubts Naruto buried with more displays of the impossible, walking on water, breathing flames, cloning himself, and even cloning her in a mirror image. These were but a few of the many displays she admittedly pestered him into showing her. Miranda justified her behavior in the absurdity of it all. How often did one meet a man capable of such amazing abilities? Now more so than ever she felt confident that he would be able to help find her daughter. But there was something she had to do first. Back at the vault, Miranda began tepidly. Hearing emotion waver her voice, Naruto stopped what he was doing to give her his full attention. "Back at the vault you said you would help me bury Nathan," she finished sadly. "And I will. Well, do it first thing tomorrow morning before we leave for Concord," Naruto said. He also wanted to return to the vault to retrieve some more vault suits for their journey, but such details were better left unsaid. "Thank you, Naruto," Miranda said in a low voice as she wiped a stray tear. Naruto inclined his head and returned to his task. For as much as Miranda was dreading the coming day, it could not come sooner. Once it did, so too did the time for their departure. "Do be careful out there, Mrs. Fox," Codsworth said with emotion altering his generated voice. "Will do, thanks for everything, Codsworth." Miranda surprised both Codsworth and Naruto by hugging him. Codsworth, when not speaking, displayed emotion with the gesturing of his arms. They dropped while the apertures of his three eyes widened in a very human display of surprise. Finally, he returned the hug as best he could with his mechanical arms. "You as well, Mr. Uzumaki. I wish you luck in your endeavors," Codsworth said, his words carrying a meaning only he understood. "And do please look after Mrs. Fox for me." "I will," Naruto acknowledged. "Oh, and one more thing." Codsworth presented a small yellow tape he'd been holding to Miranda. "I believe this was to be a gift to you from the mister. I found it in one of his drawers." Miranda accepted the tape with great care and burning eyes. "Miranda?" Naruto called her name in her extensive silence. "I'll listen to it later," she said as she wiped away while little tears had accumulated in her eyes and pocketed the tape. "Let's go. Goodbye again, Codsworth." It didn't take them long to reach the vault again. Their walk traveled in complete silence. "The lift, Miranda," Naruto said in an attempt to nudge her against her prevailing reluctance. Wordlessly Miranda approached the outer control terminal and linked her Pip-Boy and initiated the cog-shaped lift. Silence continued to reign as they made their way through the vault and into the room where it all began. Naruto respectfully maintained his distance and silence as Miranda faced her husband. She was crying as she pressed her hand to the viewing window. "I can give you some time alone if you want," Naruto offered. Truthfully, he was never one to offer comfort simply because he wasn't very good at doing so. He felt out of place, almost as if he was intruding, and would much rather not have to try and have to navigate her emotions. Miranda didn't say anything in response. In the end Naruto stayed, and she couldn't be more grateful. He didn't offer any soothing words nor physical contact, and for that she was also grateful. It simply wouldn't be right in her mind, not in front of her husband. His presence was more than enough for her in that moment. Nearly an hour passed before Miranda was able to compose herself. By then she could no longer physically continue crying, and all her memories of her husband, both the good and the bad, had been revised many times over. All that remained was finding their daughter, Samantha. the living half of her husband. I am ready, Naruto, Miranda announced. Naruto didn't speak as they crossed paths. Miranda left the room, leaving him alone in the task. A sudden idea occurred to him as he waited for the pod to disengage its lock and lumber open. Naruto brought a bleeding thumb to his left wrist, and in a plume of smoke, a bottle of ink and a thick stack of parchment paper appeared. He quickly drew a seal on a singular piece of paper and resealed the ink and remaining paper. He then approached Miranda's husband and placed the seal on his chest, but gave pause to his intended task to regard the man. "I'll make sure your wife and daughter are safe, I promise," Naruto said. He sealed the man's body away. On his way out he caught sight of his own pod and recalled Miranda skimming over his file. Even though computers existed in his own world, Naruto never had the chance or the need to use one, so even now the machine felt foreign to him as he used it to further search for any indication of how he came to be in the vault. Simple deduction led him to the file name unknown. Name: unknown. Date of birth: unknown. Sex: male. Height: 60. Weight: 203. Hair color: blonde. Eye color: blue. Status: offline condition: unknown. There was a summary extension Miranda had not explored. Naruto hesitated for the slightest of moments. His idle eyes focused on the green cursor as it blinked beside the selection. He didn't fear what he could come to discover, but rather what little was to be answered. Naruto hated being in the dark, a byproduct of the many deceptions which surrounded his childhood, from his containing Kurama to the truth behind his parentage, all revealed to him under forced circumstances, all kept to him by those who purported to care for him. He would do whatever he needed to do to find answers to all of his questions. With this decided, Naruto pressed the action key. Summary: Subject A, an adolescent male, was uncovered at the northern pole when a Vault Tech construction crew detected an unknown source of power emanating from 103 feet beneath the earth. Alive. The subject has been shipped to Vault Tech's Boston cryostasis facility for containment pending further analysis. Subject B, a pubescent female, was of a similar state of being and dress as the male subject. Insinuating a possible connection, she was sent to the Boston Commonwealth Institute of Technology for primary analysis. Subject A is to be delivered to CIT upon the successful reanimation of Subject B. Naruto's heart dropped as his eyes raked the green lettering once again, twice over, thrice with his enhanced eyes so as to commit every word to memory. Naruto? Miranda entered the stasis room with a suspicious glare. He blinked a few times, returning his eyes to default to reluctantly remove his attention from the terminal. "Where's my husband?" Miranda asked. "Another of my abilities is sealing. I can seal almost anything within sealing paper," Naruto promptly explained. Miranda noted his full attention was not on her, his words spoken almost as if in afterthought. "You sealed my husband? What does that mean exactly?" she asked with a scowl beginning to take form on her face. "It means," Naruto trailed off, "who could they have found?" he wondered. "It means just that. Inside this seal your husband will be fully preserved until the seal naturally deteriorates or until it's destroyed." Naruto presented her the seal without having looked in her direction. "Was the person frozen too? How long would that be?" Miranda asked as she grabbed the paper, studying the complex array of ink. "Or was she traveling the world too?" "If well preserved, anywhere from 60 to 80 years, Naruto continued to answer subconsciously. "If so, then how could he find her?" He was never a good sensor and sage mode was no longer a viable option. "So, I could keep him with me?" Miranda asked slowly. Her question garnered Naruto's full attention. He turned to face her with a frown. "It's best to let the dead rest, Miranda." "No, you're right. I am sorry," Miranda muttered, looking ashamed of herself. "Don't worry about it too much. You aren't the only one who's thought to do that, but it's like my master once told me. One can't truly move forward if they hold on to the past." Naruto sighed and shook his head. If only he would have followed his own advice. The two remained quiet as neither knew exactly what to say. "Could you use those seals of yours to help lighten the load?" Miranda asked while shrugging the shoulder carrying her backpack. Naruto truly wanted to palm his forehead for that massive oversight. "I can't believe I didn't think about it sooner." Naruto shook his head. "Instead of carrying around all of these supplies, I could place them in seals inside our packs to carry more things." "So you can do that?" Miranda asked. "Yes, but smaller seals can only hold so much, usually 1 or 2 items per seal. Anything bigger requires an entire scroll," Naruto explained. "That's amazing," Miranda said, her usual wonder dulled by the somber task as well as who it pertained. "I can, but the issue is I don't have very much ink or sealing parchment left. I don't really need the paper because I can seal virtually anything inside anything else. A gun in the lining of your bag, for example. It's the ink I am worried about. Don't know if I can use any ordinary ink or his own blood." Naruto decided to keep that last part to himself. He'll figure something out. There was also the fact one needed chakra to activate a seal. Miranda, as far as he could tell, didn't have any. Miranda only nodded in understanding. In theory, at any rate, she had other questions but they could wait for another time. Did you get the suits? Naruto asked. It felt odd being the one offering the most conversation. Again, Miranda remained silent as she patted her backpack, brimming full with the blue suits. Good, let's go then. The chosen burial site was just above a small hill not too far from Sanctuary, beneath a large dead oak overlooking a nearby pond. Miranda looked away while Naruto buried her husband in the very grave he excavated the day before. Trying her best to drown out the sound of the shovel cutting dirt, Miranda began to fiddle further with her Pip-Boy. With all of the previous day's happenings and revelations, she'd all but used the personal computer as little more than a heavy watch. There were times in which she was tempted to rid herself of the device but ultimately decide against the idea once she discovered a few of its many functions. Among the ones she discovered so far was a flashlight feature of sorts in which the screen became blindingly illuminating, a radio she couldn't quite get to make a sound, and a scanner linked to the vault suit itself, displaying real-time readings of herself such as heart rate, temperature, and even the condition of each of her limbs. Miranda didn't believe the last one to be true until she stubbed her foot on the doorframe of her room one morning. It was truly a groundbreaking piece of technology. It's done, Naruto announced. Miranda didn't respond as she continued to turn the dial, scanning through a multitude of settings such as color until she could find what she was looking for. Miranda? Naruto asked as he came to stand beside her. I am trying to turn the sound on. I want to hear what my husband left for me, Miranda said with audible frustration. Naruto wanted to move things along but chose to accommodate her. The sun was nearing the middle point in the sky. They needed to leave Sanctuary soon if they wanted to reach Concord before night fell. He did not like the idea of camping out in open ground should they encounter whatever creatures prowled at night. I hope this thing's on. They briefly met each other's eyes. Miranda once again teared with emotion as she turned to look down at the darkened overturned earth where her husband lay. Naruto bowed his head in respect. Hey honey. If you're wondering why I am making this, well you're taking too long at the grocery store and Lil Sammy and I are getting bored. There was a chuckle along with the giggling of an infant. I also wanted to take this moment to tell you just how much I love you, Miranda, you and Samantha both. I know I don't say this as often I should, but I hope you know I do. Miranda choked out a sob. No, I know you know and that's why I love you so much. I know I can be a bit distant at times and I don't always share as much as you would like, and for that I am sorry, but despite all my flaws you still somehow chose me. You still waited for me to come home from the army. You still gave me my beautiful baby girl, and above all else, you gave me a life I could have only ever dreamed of. Samantha began to fuss in the recording and Miranda was now on her knees, openly crying. I am rambling now and Samantha's getting hungry, or sleepy, or she might need a diaper change. It's kind of hard to tell but either way, I should end this soon. I know I've already said it many times but I love you so much, never forget that. No matter what, I will always love you with all my heart. You are everything, my world. These past few years have been the absolute happiest in all my life and I look forward to the rest of our lives together. By now Samantha was crying inconsolably and so was her mother. I know baby, Nathan soothed, it's going to be okay. Well, I guess this is goodbye for now. I love you, Miranda, I'll see you soon. Naruto felt his own eyes sting in emotion as his mind drifted to his own love. Subsequent thoughts of her death plagued his mind, the memory of her final declaration of her love for him before she laid down her life to prolong his. There was mercy in cruelty. Hinata was taken from him half a year into the Shinobi World War. In her absence she did not get to experience the death of her friends and family, or the horrors of prolonged conflict. In that moment Naruto wondered how things could have been different had he not failed. Would he have had a family? He wanted nothing more than to create a life with Hinata for what little time they loved one another. He could not imagine a more loving mother for his children. They'd even made plans for beginning a large family together once the war ended, 4 boys and 3 girls. His idea more than Hinata's, but she was more than happy to oblige in his fantasies. They'd even began thinking of names for the children they would never have. How naive they both were, but there was bliss in ignorance, mirroring the sentiment of Miranda's husband. The time spent with Hinata were undisputedly the best of his life, and they came to an abrupt end because of his inability to keep a promise. Even now his paternal instincts yearned to be fulfilled. Perhaps it was those same instincts which motivated him to so quickly offer himself to such a daunting task as recovering a child in an unknown world. But, Naruto's cynical self thought, there were other possibilities for the infant's fate, that very well may be chasing ghosts. Samantha may no longer live. It was a possibility that made little sense. Who would go through the trouble of killing a man and taking his child, only to end its life? Then again, humans could truly be warped creatures. They were the only beings in existence capable of true evil. He experienced much of it firsthand and he was witnessing it now, feeling the fruit of their hatred for one another, poisoning him alongside the world. I'll find her, Nathan, I'll find our little girl, I promise. Hearing Miranda's doleful pledge halted all of his cynical thoughts. leaving him feeling as if he was suddenly soaked with cold water. He could hear doubt eating away at what remained of her fractured spirit, and it triggered something unsuspected within. Naruto's cheeks bulged in anger and he clenched his fists. He was done failing. He promised Nathan he would protect his wife and daughter, and he aimed to keep his promise. He wasn't able to keep his promise to all of his friends, and that would forever haunt him, but he had no intention of failing again. There was also someone out in the world that may be just like him, and that gave him hope he wasn't alone in the world. Without a word, Naruto picked up the sobbing woman, taking no heed to the way in which she curled into him for comfort he couldn't offer, and began for her home. Concord was a rather small city which was home to a population of around 2,000 people. At its center was the Museum of Freedom, established in the year 1635 in order to commemorate the battles leading to the American Revolution. The small populace of Concord were a proud bunch, some would even say peculiar. Miranda remembered visiting the small city once on a high school field trip. Some of the citizens had even taken to wandering the streets in full colonial attire, going as far as to speak in the period diction. If her estimation was correct, they weren't more than a half-hour's walk from reaching Concord. She was eagerly anticipating any possible news of her daughter because she certainly needed it, especially after the nightmares she suffered from the events of the day before. As subtly as possible, Miranda glanced in Naruto's direction. He had spoken very little since their departure that morning, taking to responding to most of her questions with little more than single-syllable grunts. For some reason he returned to being the cold, almost uncaring man Shed met the first day. Miranda wondered if his change in attitude was somehow a result of something Shed done. Not that he was much of a conversationalist before, but he had been opening up to her, going as far as to reveal a rather startling secret to her. Maybe, she thought, he was uncomfortable with how she sought his comfort. She certainly was. Miranda wasn't in the right state of mind when she buried herself in his shoulder, only letting go of him when he laid her to bed, where she proceeded to cry well into the night until eventually exhaustion claimed her. When she returned to her senses the next morning, she didn't have the courage to acknowledge the incident, and Naruto didn't mention anything, so she decided to feign ignorance, and for that much she was grateful, but the heavy silence was beginning to get to her. Miranda, stop. Miranda jumped from her thoughts as well as physically. It happened so fast, and before she could so much as comprehend what was happening, Naruto fired off 3 shots, one after another. She was forced behind him and Kiba both. That's when she saw what he fired at. A large and hairless creature writhed on the ground, dying. What is that thing? Miranda asked. A hairless dog maybe, Naruto said, keeping his gun at the ready. He snapped his fingers at Kiba and then pointed at Miranda. The canine seemed to understand its given command and remained at her side, teeth bared and ears perked. He cautiously approached the fallen creature and kicked it off its belly and onto its back to reveal a creature that looked like a large mole rat, an animal present in both worlds. Naruto, look out! Miranda called out after another of the mutations exploded out from the ground with no warning. He couldn't lift his gun fast enough to fire, but managed to swing his knuckles into the creature, sending it soaring before it could bite him with its elongated teeth. Naruto's gun traced the creature through the air. Another try burst, killing it before it even hit the ground, but it wasn't he who fired. Naruto glared at Miranda, her smoking gun shaking in her hand, eyes wide. Next time don't fire with me in your line of sights, he chastised. It took all of a moment to register what he said, and she was livid. Why are you mad? That thing was going to kill you. It was something of an exaggeration on her part, and Naruto had no issue calling her out on it. That thing wouldn't have been able to hurt me. The bullet could have. I had it under control, he said. That's not what it looked like to me, Miranda huffed. Naruto didn't much feel like repeating recent history. Look, I appreciate that you tried to help me, but next time please be careful not to shoot something near or behind me. Just warn me and I'll take care of it. I am not trying to gripe at you. I am just trying to make sure we're both safe. Whatever. Despite her dry remark, Miranda understood his reasoning, although it was hard to believe in his sincerity when he displayed the emotional range of a rock, except for annoyance, because that was not beyond his reach, and if he had no problem showing it, then neither would she. She would prove to him that just because he was helping her find her daughter, he wasn't allowed to treat her like a child. Naruto rolled his eyes at her childish behavior and began after the woman in her quickened pace. He whistled at Kiba, who was already eating away at the creature's corpse. He would not deny that some of his frustration stemmed from her actions, but the main cause for his sour mood stemmed from the immense pain he found himself in. His wounds remained raw and his head ached immensely. With only a 2-day supply of Rad X remaining, Naruto found himself rationing the pills by halving them, taking 1/4 of the recommended dose for a mild case of radiation exposure. The effects of his illness were making themselves glaring apparent. Look, Naruto, Concord's up ahead. Naruto acknowledged Miranda's words with a nod she didn't see. She was occupied marveling at the fact most of the city's buildings remained standing, towering in the horizon. Come on. Miranda called after him and she began to jog. That was until he called after her. Slow down. We don't know what we'll find there, Naruto warned. She stopped mid-stride with an audible sigh but said nothing, continuing in a quickened pace, silent through his pain. Naruto struggled but managed to keep up with the excitable woman, at least he did so for a time. Miranda, slow down, he repeated, we need to make a plan before we get there. With another sigh, she complied and slowed her stride to allow him to walk beside her. We're going to have to be careful entering Concord. Codsworth mentioned the people heading for the city weren't exactly the most friendly. Also, there's no telling what we'll find there. We can't risk walking into a trap, so we need to avoid any main streets, or even being out in the open if we can help it, Naruto said. I hadn't thought of that, Miranda admitted. What do you think we should do? Before we get there, we'll find a place to hide away while I send a clone ahead of us to scout for any possible danger. We'll plan accordingly once we know what we're up against, Naruto explained. You said your clones give you their memories when they die, right? Miranda asked. When they're dispelled, yes. Now come on, I think I see somewhere we can take a break, Naruto said. He led them to the remains of a military truck parked off the side of the road, into the transport section for the soldiers. Miranda welcomed the reprieve from walking all day beneath the beating sun while Naruto remained outside, eyes closed in concentration. In a plume of smoke, a perfect clone of himself appeared, making itself useful by helping his progenitor to his feet. Naruto, what's wrong? Miranda asked, having seen him fall to a knee. You know what to do, Naruto told his clone after it led him to his seat on the back of the truck. He regarded Miranda next. I am fine, but making shadow clones takes quite a bit of my chakra. Before Miranda could respond, the clone disappeared from sight, kicking up a small whirlwind in his wake, prompting her to gasp behind him. What was that? Where did you go? She asked with a mixture of awe and confusion. That was called a shunshin. A technique from my world that allows one to quickly travel great distances in bursts of linear direction, Naruto said. But that sounds weird in English. I guess you would call it the body flicker. Her awe and the questions that followed were put on hold seeing his current state. He leaning back against the truck, his breath still labored and he was drenched in sweat. He seemed to have exhausted himself to the point of becoming concerning. Are you sure you're okay? Miranda asked, trying not to sound as concerned as she really was. I am fine, Naruto repeated, closing his eyes. The clones I showed you a few days ago were only illusionary. They aren't real in the sense they can actually do anything beyond being a distraction. The clone I just made, the shadow clone, is a physical copy of myself. They have my same strength but they require exactly half of my chakra to create just one, Naruto said. Naruto simply didn't stop amazing her and she accidentally voiced it. Amazing. Thanks, but the thing is, they're kinda a gamble right now. One solid hit and it's gone and I can't exactly make another one right now, so we'd better hope nothing takes it out before it reaches Concord, Naruto said. He's you, right? Like in every sense of the word, with powers and all? Miranda asked. Yes, then I am sure he'll be fine, Miranda said with a nonchalant shrug of her shoulders. Humming to herself, she sat back against the torn tarp covering the transport and seemed to relax. Retrieving a water bottle, Kiba hopped up to join her at her side, panting happily as she scratched his ears and shared her water. Naruto, meanwhile, was stumped by her faith in him. It was very foolish of her, yet Naruto couldn't deny the endearment nor the warmth of her contagious optimism. He glanced over his shoulder to Miranda and found he was stricken by her dimpled smile. Small as it may have been, she was humming an unfamiliar tune to herself as she continued to pamper Kiba, her voice soft and warm. Something about the picture filled Naruto with an unknown discomfort, forcing him to quickly turn away, looking over to the horizon where his clone had gone. Naruto shook his head, trying not to think about what had just occurred, though he was sure of one thing. If Miranda placed so much faith in him, then he couldn't possibly disappoint. Hey, Naruto, she called out from behind him after a moment's prolonged silence. Naruto hummed. Why do you think Kiba obeys so well now? Unless you've got a fancy ninja trick for doggy obedience? Miranda said, giggling slightly at her own joke. Naruto allowed himself to smirk, confident she couldn't see him. Well, not exactly, but back in my world there was a family of ninja called the Inuzuka. They specialized in training dogs for tracking, but they were also used for battle. Hell, some of their dogs could even talk, he said. That didn't take into account summons, a technique had yet to garner enough chakra to attempt. Now I know you're just messing with me, Miranda huffed. I mean, talking dogs? Next you'll tell me there were ninja with X-ray vision too, she stated. Something like that, Naruto said with well-masked melancholy. You know, I don't know if I believe you. Naruto exhaled twice through his nose in what she recognized to be a short chuckle. Miranda was glad he couldn't see the disbelief she was likely displaying. You know, there's a reason behind Kiba's name. Kiba, he was a friend of mine. Well, he was more of a friendly rival than anything. He was from the family of the dog trainers I mentioned earlier, Naruto said. Kiba, having heard his name mentioned a few times, padded over to where his master was seated and laid down beside him, yawning before resting his head in his lap. Naruto began to pet him as well. And that's why you thought it would be a good idea to name your dog after him? Miranda did nothing to hide her disbelief. I don't know if you realize this, Naruto, but that's actually rather insulting. Oh, I know. Miranda wasn't sure what to make of just how casually he admitted to this. But back to your question, I honestly don't know. Maybe his previous owner taught him obedience, though he wasn't too keen on listening to me when we first met. Dumb dog. There's a reason I named him Kiba, Naruto muttered while holding his aching chest. Another prolonged silence permeated the air. Why don't you join me in here? There's shade, Miranda offered. I have to keep an eye out for trouble, Naruto rebutted. His tone held a sense of finality and Miranda couldn't help but feel their moment, if it could be considered a moment, had passed. The clone felt annoyed by his own carelessness for ignoring the obvious. His creator shared everything with him in creating him, his ailment and dismal chakra included. Old habits were the hardest to kill. The 2 body flickers needed to reach the outskirts of the city left him feeling winded but thankfully still able. Though a mere clone, he still wasn't used to feeling so ill for so long. If his creator wasn't careful, he may very well cross the dangerous line from low chakra to complete depletion. With his radiation poisoning, it could very well lead to his death. Keeping his limitations in mind, the clone began his stealthy approach to Concord. He was mindful to remain uphill, using what natural means of cover he could to the best of his abilities. Granted, the wide-open terrain offered little in the means of concealment. He used his advanced eyesight to scan the exterior of the decrepit city for any signs of life but found none. He couldn't have been less than a half a mile away when he heard shots cracking in the distance. The clone took cover behind a nearby boulder, laying flat on his back, listening closely for an originating point for the gunfire, but he found it difficult to determine. What he did realize after a short while was that he was not the target. Remaining in a prone position, he peeked and confirmed there was no one in sight. Ever cautiously, he continued to approach the city, the firefight continuing to grow louder as he entered the city's limits. Deciding he needed a vantage point to better survey the landscape and assess the situation, he walked up the nearest building where he became prone once more, crawling through gravel and broken glass to reach the building's edge. Peering over the edge, he witnessed a rather large battle over 20 men and women alike, concentrating fire on the city's main attraction. His advanced eyes allowed him to see a man dressed in even more strange getup than his attackers, returning fire. To his side, another man joined the fray, sharing the window, the 2 taking turns darting in and out of fire, taking pop shots in a failing attempt to stave away the enemy forces. They are closing in, Preston. The clone could read the Mont's lips in the constant pops of gunfire mixed with the odd tearing of the weapon shooting angry streaks of red, one of which struck one of the attackers, burning through his chest with ease. We can't back down now or we'll be overrun for sure. The man who had to be Preston shouted back. I won't let anyone else die, goddammit. The clone was presented with a choice entirely his own. He could step in and help the people trapped within the building, or he could immediately report his findings to his creator, leaving them to their inevitable fate depending on what his progenitor decided to do. There wasn't much incentive beyond information to actually help those trapped within. Assuming they were any friendlier than the men and women dressed in armor meant equal parts for intimidation and protection. Shit, they've breached. Blow the walkways and barricade the door, Preston ordered, tossing a grenade before retreating inside. This time the words reached his ears and his decision was made. He would just have to get rid of as many of the enemy combatants as he could. Should he die in the process, then his creator would still be informed of the situation. A grin spread across his face as his decision was cemented. His existence was never meant to last. He had no reason for caution beyond the avoidance of blatant stupidity. He would not rush in blindly, but neither would he restrict the use of his chakra. The clone lifted himself into a crouch and produced a simple kitchen knife in his dominant hand. In his left, the pistol was loaded and ready to fire. He flickered to the nearest inhabited rooftop and quickly dispatched the 2 riflemen with a precise lance to their brains, ending the life of both before either could notice the death of the other. With the constant explosions of bullets, he didn't concern himself with concealing their falls. He only assured they died out of sight before continuing to the next rooftop. He managed to clear the head of 2 more buildings before he was spotted, only he didn't realize it until his eyes instinctively activated their tracing abilities, catching the slightest glimpse of a red bolt of energy which crashed close enough to him to feel the heat. The bullets were now raining down at him. There was little option for him to escape now that they knew where he was and his chakra was nigh depleted, but he did have just enough to perform one final technique. Risking a peek, he saw as some of the attackers grouped together. He shot his 10 rounds and he killed 8 of the attackers. There was a surprising amount of men and women, more than had initially witnessed, and soon their numbers were replenished, scattering from within darkened buildings. He quickly ran through the hand seals required for his final technique, using his natural affinity for wind-style techniques to use what little remained of his chakra as efficiently as possible. He leapt off the roof, landing in the middle of the street, startling his attackers into a brief ceasefire as they wondered how he'd survived a 5-story fall. His aching lungs filled with air and chakra, expelling it all in the great breakthrough technique, essentially splattering those in front of him, also destroying the building behind. His victory short-lived as he was destroyed by another volley of bullets. Shit, Naruto cursed as the memories flooded him as well as the phantom pain of being riddled with bullets. What's wrong? Miranda asked. There's a large enemy force surrounding some people trapped inside the Museum of Freedom. My clone was just killed, Naruto explained, cursing his clone's careless heroics. Their guided autonomy was at times pesky, but at the least he cleared the rooftops for the time being. Another concern of his was the weaponry he witnessed. He was certain he could survive a gunshot wound anywhere but his head. A laser, on the other hand, was a complete unknown. What are we going to do? Miranda asked. Nothing, Naruto said. All of 2 instances passed before his words fully registered. What do you mean we're not going to do anything? Those people need our help, Miranda said as she jumped out from behind the truck. It's too much of a risk. There was well over a dozen remaining and well-armed attackers, and that's just what my clone saw, and there's no telling if the people in the museum are friendly, Naruto said, though his clone's memories suggested otherwise, but that truth wouldn't help his case. You're lying to me. Naruto looked to the woman, finding her arms were crossed petulantly and she was attempting to glare at him, though she wasn't very good at doing so. Why would I lie? He asked rhetorically. I don't know, but I just know you are. Miranda was quick to invade his personal space. Naruto, we have to go. They may have my daughter with them inside that museum. It was a possibility, but a slim one. Naruto, however, was focused more so on what she could have possibly meant by what she said. There was no fathomable way Miranda could see, through his misdirect, not a lie. If that's the case, then they aren't going to be friendly, Naruto said. We need to know for sure, she argued. It's not safe. Then I'll go by myself, you coward. Miranda pushed him in her anger, only managing to budge the solid wall of muscle ever so slightly, torn muscle as she now recalled as he recoiled in pain, holding his chest. She wanted instantly to apologize, but doing so would be an admittance of submission. Naruto growled in pain of her actions and in anger because of her words. Miranda took a cautious step back, believing for a very brief moment he may strike back with his sharp words, possibly even physically. Fine, but you're staying here, Naruto said. Absolutely not, Miranda argued immediately. You'll only get in the way, Naruto denied her. Damn it, Naruto, we don't have time to argue right now. You're injured and you need my help. Can you honestly say you're ready to take a life? Naruto asked. This time Miranda had no instant response. On some level she knew she would, at one point, potentially have to kill someone, and she came to accept that reality. She was beginning to see some things were easier in theory than in practical application. Now faced with the real possibility of combat and the taking of a life, she wasn't too sure in her own resolve. If it's for my daughter, she swallowed audibly, then yes. Naruto frowned. She would eventually have to experience her first kill, and that moment would have been the most opportune, if he was in a better state to protect her. With how stubborn Miranda had proven herself thus far, he knew leaving her behind would only prove counterproductive. She was liable to follow after him in her own pace, quite possibly encountering something or someone she was not ready to deal with. Fine, you can come, but only if you listen to every command I give you, Naruto relented and stipulated. I can do that, Miranda agreed. I mean it, if you argue with me, or if I think that it's too dangerous, well, turn back, no questions, Naruto said. His grimly commanding tone let Miranda know he was being entirely serious and that there would be no further conceding on his part. She never doubted this, of course, but being ordered around by a man younger than herself felt odd. I understand, Miranda stated seriously. Okay. Naruto turned to regard their canine companion, Kiba. I am gonna need you to stay. The dog whimpered as he recognized his master's command and sat himself on his hindquarters to show his obedience. Naruto then removed his backpack and sealed it within a paper seal, itself sealed within a more permanent seal tattooed on the back of his hand with disappearing ink. A modification had made to himself in the past. He then kneeled down. Get on my back. We'll never make it to Concord on time to save them if we don't hurry. Miranda felt her face heat up as she did as she was told, her arms lacing around his neck. She inhaled sharply, feeling his strong grip on her thighs. Hold on as tightly as possible. We're going to be traveling incredibly quickly and you might experience some sickness. I recommend you close your eyes, Naruto said. Again, doing as she was instructed, buried her head in the crook of his neck. No sooner did she feel herself lurch back, forcing her to instinctively hold onto Naruto even tighter, as her body continued experiencing rapid bursts of acceleration, each leaving her feeling as though the next would separate her from him. To compensate for this, she wrapped her legs as tightly as possible around his waist. Miranda felt absolutely ashamed as her body began to react naturally to the jarring motion. The experience could not be over sooner for her. "You can open your eyes now," Naruto said, winded as he carefully placed her back down on her feet. Miranda immediately doubled over, dry heaving. "It'll pass soon," Naruto said in understanding. "I am fine," Miranda muttered as she tried her best to push past a different sickening sensation in her belly, her mouth watering from the need to retch. Just give me a minute. I feel like I am going to throw up. My body flicker isn't the most precise. Some people from my world could transport others just by putting a hand on their shoulder," Naruto admitted. "Is there any way you could learn to do that?" Miranda asked, now on her feet and doing her best to keep from facing him. "If I get the time, I'll try to better my technique. I have a feeling we're going to have to be doing plenty of fast traveling," Naruto responded in thought. There simply weren't enough trees for his traditional method of travel and he doubted they would find a working vehicle. "Yes, please do that." Naruto regarded her oddly. His curiosity only lasted until distant pops reminded him of the ongoing battle. He quickly pulled Miranda with him to the closest building, a run-down two-story home, blue in color. The back door was locked. "What now?" Miranda whispered. Naruto let go of her hand and pushed the door off of its hinges with the same hand and little visible effort. Miranda was in awe of his strength. "Stay close and be ready." His words reminded Miranda of her own weapon. She quickly drew it, chambered around, and clicked the safety off. She followed closely after Naruto into the dark room. It was a ransacked department store. Shelves long since pillaged lined the walls and at the back a register remained opened. Grabbing her hand again, Naruto led Miranda around fallen shelves and a multitude of other debris from years of dilapidation. The storefront was rather small, the two quickly reaching the front of the store. The remaining glass which once displayed wares was now stained black from centuries of grime. In absence of glass were sun-shrunken boards nailed into the wall. "Stand here." Naruto positioned Miranda away from the windows while he found his own cover. He carefully pulled out one of the boards and peered out. Not much had changed since the demise of his clone. Two more of the enemy combatants had joined their overall casualties and it appeared as if they were waiting. Hearing gunshots from within, Naruto understood why. "What's going on?" Miranda asked. "Some of them have made it inside." Naruto motioned her to join him. "The others are waiting outside until they exhaust them." "Oh no," Miranda muttered. Seeing at least 7 men and 2 women dressed in cliched apocalyptic armor, her heart began to race at the very real possibility of death lingering just beyond. She began to question her own resolve in her previous statement, now unsure if she could really take a life. Subconsciously, she pressed herself into Naruto's back. Mindless of her actions, Naruto began to formulate a plan of attack. From their position he may be able to eliminate 3, potentially 5 if he was lucky with his eyes and gun alone. He was reluctant to enact this strategy. The moment he opened fire their position would be exposed, leaving them open to return fire, potentially being flanked from behind. "We're going to have to go around them," Naruto decided. "What?" Naruto reached behind himself to take hold of her hand again and pulled her along. "We're going around behind the museum. If we can find a point of entrance we can join the people within and push the ones outside back. If we can take the museum we'll have a stronghold in the high ground," Naruto said, coming to a stop at the door to face Miranda. "We're probably going to have to kill the ones inside. Both of us, so I'll ask again. Are you sure you want to do this? Because once we start shooting, there'll be no stopping until they retreat. They die, or we do." Miranda's legs shook uncontrollably to match her running heart, her face showing her reluctance. She was a new mother in what was once a relatively peaceful world, at least domestically, Naruto had to remind himself as she fidgeted to avoid his eyes. "Miranda, look at me." Naruto began softly. His contrasting tone did well to grab her attention. Miranda found she couldn't pull away from the intensity of his blue eyes, which she just now noticed how beautiful they truly were. "I know you're scared and you have every reason to be. Those people out there are dangerous. I won't think any less of you if you don't want to do this anymore. But you can't stay here. If you don't feel comfortable in taking a life, you don't have to. I'll take you far enough away from here and I'll do this alone," Naruto offered. Miranda bit her bottom lip in angst at her conflicting emotions. She wasn't sure what to do. She didn't want to kill anyone, but then she knew there would be no avoiding it eventually. The world was as dangerous as she suspected beyond mutations. "You'll be right beside me, right?" Naruto sympathized with her, his thoughts briefly occupied with memories of his first real mission and their encounter with Zabuza. "Yes, I won't let anyone hurt you, but I need you to be sure this is what you want," he reassured. "Okay." Miranda felt her confidence rise with his words. "I don't want to do this, you know, the killing part, but let's do this, partner." She felt her cheeks immediately grow hot at the flash of amusement Naruto displayed. She really hadn't meant to say that, Miranda lamented. She really was too honest for her own good, Naruto mused. Well, circle back around the east side of town and skim by until we reach the museum. We'll have to find a point of entry then, but for now, I need you to stay next to me and keep quiet unless absolutely necessary, Naruto said. Okay. This time, Miranda did take notice of the large calloused hand which wrapped around her own, as well as the warmth that invaded her traitorous hand. Thankfully, or perhaps not, she was distracted from the implications by the ensuing gunfire and curses echoing across the surrounding structures. Miranda did as she was instructed and followed closely behind Naruto, stopping when he did as well as running when needed. Finally, they reached the back end of the museum. Naruto found the most suitable entrance to be a window boarded up like the others. There was no immediate sounds of a struggle from within and it was closest to the adjacent building should they need to retreat. I am going in first. Keep watch and tell me if you see someone. I'll let you know when you can come in. One by one he slowly pushed in the obstructing boards and entered the empty room. It was a small office. His very footsteps kicked up clouds of dust. Come on, Naruto said quietly, helping Miranda through the window. They grouped near the door to listen for any sounds of life. He noticed she was squinting her eyes in the dark. Tell me when your eyes have adjusted to the dark before we move on. Just as he finished speaking, muffled gunfire and curses sounded from above. Miranda gasped and Naruto indicated she stay quiet, hearing footsteps right above their head, wisps of dust falling as someone walked on the floor above. We should just charge them. A gruff voice sounded out in another brief lull. Can't be more than 4 or 5 of those fuckers in there. We have our orders, another voice replied, and for once I agree with the boss. They should be low on ammo by now. All we have to do is keep them engaged and wait them out. Yeah, but what about the synth who killed the idiots on the roof? If there was one of them, there's bound to be more. If we wait too long, we could be next. A third joined in, a woman this time. Don't tell me you're scared. The second man laughed. Fuck you. You saw what he did. What it did. That synth managed to kill 4 of us without shooting a single bullet. David said he even saw it jump clear across 2 buildings. And then there was whatever it did last. He fucking eviscerated them. The woman sounded truly shaken. Well, whatever the case, the boss got him. The second man chimed in again, though there was a certain unease to his voice now. Littered him with bullets. Ain't no way he survived that. Yeah, but we didn't find a body, the first man said. They remained silent after that. Naruto and Miranda shared an inquisitive look at what they'd just heard. He decided to store that piece of information away for later inquiry, to be compared to something hinted at other beings capable of superhuman abilities the likes he displayed. Let's get moving, Naruto whispered. Miranda lifted her gun slightly below chest level, ready to lift and take aim like had shown her, and followed. As she followed after Naruto, in the nearly deafening silence, interrupted at random by gunfire, she noticed she could hear her own footsteps, but never his. Naruto motioned her to stay in place as they neared the end of the corridor. He peered into a larger hallway. She quickly approached him after being signaled to do so. She was confused when he invaded her personal space. His whiskered cheek nearly touched her own. There's 2 of them in there. I'll take care of them both, but I recommend you watch and see how I do it. This isn't something I'd like you to see, but you are going to have to get used to it, Naruto whispered said. Miranda shivered and peeked around the corner after Naruto rounded it, seeing 2 men standing side by side, silently smoking cigarettes. He pocketed his gun and drew 2 small kitchen blades. Naruto wasn't fond of using basic kitchenware as weaponry, but they carried out their intended purpose just the same. He impaled both men at the base of their skulls with a sickening crunch, neither knowing what happened before death swept them away. Miranda felt a sinking sickness pool in her belly seeing how they fell. Lifeless. A surprising amount of blood began to pool beneath them very quickly, and Naruto didn't seem to even hesitate as he scoured the dead for their supplies. Unaware of his companion's thoughts, he shouldered one of the rifles, a shamble of a weapon poorly held together by wire and tape. He found 4 spare magazines, opting to keep 2. He removed the bullets from the remaining 2 into his backpack, falling one by one with quick and quiet metallic clatters. Well, practice with these later, Naruto said as he motioned her over with a nod of his head. What now? She asked as she stepped over the bodies, doing her best to ignore their presence. We need to keep the element of surprise as long as possible. If we can avoid a gunfight, we should, but we may not always be able to do that. Remember, stay close and listen closely to any command I give you, Naruto reiterated. Yeah, okay, Miranda said, her morbid curiosity taking hold of her, forcing her to look behind back to the dead. Miranda, Naruto said with some force. She looked back to him. Yes? Are you with me? Naruto asked. Miranda nodded with a stronger sense of confidence. She didn't like the idea of death or killing, but the sickening feeling she felt just moments ago was already passing. Naruto was, at the end of the day, on her side. They continued making their way through the Museum of Freedom. Naruto killed 3 more of the intruders in a similar manner as before. Though resolute in their objective, Miranda's feelings fluctuated with every person he dispatched, unsure of how to feel about just how effective he was at doing so. The next room they entered was rather narrow, occupied by. Alongside mannequins were 6 people in total, 2 women and 4 men, just like the ones before. They were fortuitously facing the opposite direction, each occupied in either conversation or a vice of their choosing. Some inhaled noxious fumes from cigarettes, while others from an oddly shaped tube, resulting in increased and sporadic movement typically associated with nerve-altering narcotics. The 2 women were sharing between them a worn, silver flask as well as idle chatter. They were human. Miranda came to the horrifying realization that, while a majority of the enemies they encountered were bad people, some of them were simply trying to survive, doing what was necessary to do so. She gathered as much from the semi-friendly banter of the women, and even some of the men. Naruto, I don't think. But he was already gone, blurring in impossible-to-follow speeds. He cleared the room with frightening speed and proficiency. He paid no heed to the desperate cries of those who lived long enough to witness the death of those around. Hearing and seeing the deathly precision of a shinobi were 2 different experiences. Making the best of a bad situation was a natural coping mechanism. In the wake of so much death, Miranda once again reminded herself Naruto was on her side, helping her find her daughter. Also, they were in the museum at her request. Any words she had died on the tip of her tongue at the reminder he was committing such atrocities for her sake. Miranda didn't know if she was supposed to feel guilty or grateful, or perhaps even both. Damn it, she opted to worry about him, seeing him on one knee, breathing hard. Naruto, what's wrong? Miranda asked as she rushed to his side, stopping herself short of helping him back to his feet. I am getting very low on chakra again. We're going to have to use our guns from here on, Naruto said, lumbering to his feet. His statement struck Miranda like a lance of ice to her midsection. There was no avoiding joining the fray now. Naruto noted this and approached her. Now may not be the best time to do this, but you can still leave if you want. It'll get you to safety before I continue. No, she stated almost automatically. I can do this. Miranda almost fidgeted beneath his hard stare. It was, at times, difficult to recall he was 12 years younger than her. Okay then. Their advance led them up some stairs and to a room littered with the bodies. The conflict continued upstairs, though with much less return fire from one side. What happened to them? Miranda asked. She realized how redundant her question was the moment she uttered it. I am not sure, but they still have some color, so it's likely our friends upstairs did this, Naruto said, and made to gather what he could from the fallen. Though his efforts resulted in little as they had already been looted by someone. Gotta keep moving forward carefully, don't want to get confused for one of these guys. How do you know where we're even going? I've been here before myself and it was a maze even back then, Miranda said. The positioning of their bodies, Naruto gestured to the 3 dead and then to the immediate of the door frame. You see the bullet holes on the walls behind us? Even without that, everyone we've encountered have all been positioned facing one way. This means they were chasing after the survivors as they made their way upstairs. This group must have been the first to reach them. How are we going to let them know we aren't with them? She asked nervously. Suddenly Naruto's earlier words were at the forefront of her concerns. It was possible the group they aimed to help weren't exactly friendly. The only real option we have is to tell them that and hope they believe us. The vault suits and our general appearance should be enough to differentiate us from them, Naruto said. Miranda didn't particularly like the idea of leaving things to chance but found no better alternative. Soon they found themselves out in the open foyer with stairs leading up in 2 opposite directions. From their position there were 2 more floors before reaching the top, both of which had broken walkways between them. How are we supposed to get up there? I remember the only way to the stairs leading up to the next floor are across the way, Miranda said while pointing at the fallen walkway. One of 2 ways, either we find another way around, or we jump, Naruto said. We jump? Miranda repeated in disbelief. How am I supposed to jump all the way across that? Naruto studied the gap she was pointing to. It had to have spanned well over 10 feet across and if failed, over a 20-foot drop to the bottom, an easy fall for him, certain injury or death for Miranda. Even with his low reserves his physicality was enough to make the jump, a jump she could not. Let's hope we find an alternative route, if not we're going to have to jump, the both of us at the same time, Naruto said. Miranda understood and prayed silently to find another way. The 2 stalked upstairs and into a narrow hallway where a single woman stood well within their range. She was watching the forward hallway rather intently. Naruto gently pushed her back down to the base of the stairs and moved close to her again. This is it. Wait until you hear more gunshots to hide yours, he said. Miranda knew what he was referring to immediately and she didn't argue despite how much she wanted to. She merely lifted her gun, a numb sense of dread washing over her like ice water. Naruto's presence behind her was heavy. Without having to see him she knew he was close behind her, watching, waiting to see what she would do. Miranda really didn't want to kill anyone, but there was little alternative from what little they'd experienced since waking up in the vault. There was more fighting above and with great hesitation she took aim and began to pull at the trigger, painstakingly approaching the trigger's wall. ready to commit what she could only hope was a necessary evil. "Miranda, if you can't." His words were drowned out by deafening gunshot which sounded out in the unfortunate and sudden streak of silence which had enveloped them. "We have to go now." Naruto had no choice but to pull Miranda back down the stairs, quickly leading her into a nearby office. She fired in a moment of silence, and it was likely they no longer remained undetected. Naruto was surprised she had actually gone through and taken a life with little argument, though her regret was immediately apparent. "I killed her," Miranda muttered. "I know." Naruto peeked back around from where they came, listening closely for anyone, but silence reigned. "But we have to keep moving because there'll be more ahead. Are you able to keep going?" "Yes," Miranda agreed, but her eyes remained unfocused. "Miranda." Naruto gently shook her in an attempt to bring her out of her mind. "They had to have noticed that shot came from behind them. They know we're here now and they'll be ready. I need to know you are too." Miranda steadied her breath and wiped away a stray tear and nodded, looking into his eyes to make a point. "Yes, let's go. Stay behind me and stick to cover, especially if they start shooting at us. I'll take it from here," Naruto said. They advanced upstairs, past the dead woman. Miranda tried not to look at the woman's face, who would have been beautiful if not for the hard life she must have lived, but failed in her attempt. She found solace in knowing her death was instantaneous and her suffering had ended. This did nothing to quell the guilt which twisted her heart, pulling it into the depths of her sinking stomach. Naruto cleared the next two rooms, unaware of the inner turmoil which plagued Miranda. He was focused on keeping them both alive because she didn't react quick enough to so much as fire her weapon, forcing him to eliminate all three in the first room, and missed both of the men who occupied the second despite taking a few shots. He wondered if maybe Miranda missed her targets on purpose. Naruto certainly wouldn't blame her. His first kill was handled in a much worse manner and embarrassingly enough, with much more tears. He could only hope she would come to accept her new reality soon. His reflexes allowed him the confidence to conduct close-quarters combat, but he knew he wouldn't be able to protect them both under open field fire. "I am sorry." Naruto stopped his rummaging of one of the fallen to regard the woman in question. He had an inclination of what she was leading to, and though they were far from in the clear, he decided to let her speak. "About what?" he said, playing along. "I wasn't any help," Miranda said while looking at the gun in her hand. "I am only getting in your way. I understand that now." "I froze completely when I took my first life," Naruto said, standing and moving to address her quietly. "If it wasn't for my master, I would have died." Miranda was searching his eyes for a way to rid herself of the horrid sensation in her heart. "How do you do it? How can you kill so easily?" She instantly regretted the way she worded her question and just how accusatory it sounded. "It gets easier," Naruto admitted. "You don't think it will, or maybe even that it should, but it does." That only made Miranda feel worse. Naruto noticed this and ran a hand through his greasy hair in exasperation, lamenting not knowing when he bathed last. To think people used to praise him for his way with words. "It also helps to have a reason," he continued awkwardly, "until it does get easier. So yes, you're taking lives, but it's to protect your daughter. If you die, then who'll save and protect her?" "You would," Miranda answered immediately. Naruto blinked and, momentarily confused by her words, "I would." "Would you?" Miranda asked. He wanted to look away, but her eyes were large, shimmering and searching. Yeah, of course I would." Despite her feelings, Miranda smiled, seeing his nervousness. Thinking the expression made him look very young, she proceeded to do something that shocked them both. "Thank you," she whispered, hugging him tightly. "Yeah," Naruto muttered but did not return the gesture. Miranda sniffed and released him after a few awkward moments, following after Naruto further up the next flight of stairs, only to walk into his back once they'd reached the top. "Hold it right there." She peeked over Naruto's shoulder to see a man dressed oddly in Revolutionary-era clothing. He had a strange rifle aimed straight at them from a doorway at the peak of the next stairway. Miranda reacted by lifting her gun, only to immediately encounter resistance. Naruto pushed Miranda behind him, his hand pressed to her belly should he have pushed her away if things came to that. "We're not with them, we're here to help," he stated calmly. Recognition flashed through the monk's eyes. "You're that man from before? But how? I saw them shoot you and then you just kind of vanished." Miranda looked at Naruto inquisitively and then to his hand pressed firmly against her. "I moved," Naruto answered simply. "Right." He lowered his rifle down and motioned them forward. "Well, I am not gonna look a gift horse in the mouth. The name's Preston Garvey, and I thank you both for your help." Miranda knew Naruto wouldn't make a great ambassador for them, so she moved around him. "I am Miranda Fox, and Mr. Personality here's name is Naruto. Glad we could help." The three exchanged handshakes, Naruto giving Miranda the side-eye for her introduction of him and the fact she'd suddenly taken charge. "If that's true, then your continued help would be much appreciated," Preston stated hopefully. "Well, do what we can. But who are these people?" Miranda asked as she looked over the ragtag group of survivors, regarding them nervously. all with the exception of a kindly-looking old woman, who merely smiled at her. She was saddened to find no infant among them. Just good folks trying to survive. We've been together for a while now. He paused. A month ago there used to be 20 of us, now we're 5, it's me, Sturgis, Mercy Long and her husband, Jim, and old Mama June. I am sorry to hear that. Miranda offered her condolence and turned to regard the others in the room. It's nice to meet you all. Thank you, but back to what we were discussing earlier, Preston said, the pain of his loss evident for a brief moment. Of course, what do you have in mind? Miranda asked. Naruto listened in silence. If he were unaccompanied he would have questioned the group on all they knew and would be on his way, but he decided to allow Miranda to take the lead for the time being. She was currently experiencing a form of guilt and the only way to right her perceived wrong was to help the group. He knew this because had done something very similar himself at one point, and just like Jiraiya before him, he would go along with it so long as it didn't place them in danger. Beyond that, a temporary alliance with the survivors would be very beneficial to their survival. They had to escape the museum somehow, and as he was in that moment, they needed the advantage of numbers. Sturgis, you tell them, Preston said. Sturgis slicked back his pompadour with a smirk and presented his hand. It'll be my pleasure conversing with such a beautiful young lady, he said flirtatiously and with hints of a southern drawl. Miranda accepted his hand with great reluctance and was not amused when he kissed the back of hers. Anyways, Sturgis cleared his throat when it became apparent his attempt had failed. There's a sweet T-45 power armor suit sitting up on the roof next to the downed vertibird. I am sure you seen it coming in. She actually hadn't, but decided he didn't need to know that. Naruto for his part, did see the contraption but thought nothing of it at the time. I am guessing you want us to get that suit for you? Miranda assumed. Half correct. You see, I am a pacifist at heart. Alright. I am happiest when I am fixing things, not killin'. As much as I love talkin' that baby for a spin, that piece of machinery just ain't for me. Call me old-fashioned, but for all the protection all that metal offers, I don't much like the idea of lumbering around, but, seeing as how you two seem to know how to handle yourselves, figured it would be of much better use in your hands, Preston added. All I want to do is get my people out of here, so if you two want to keep that armor, it's all yours. Just please help us fend off the raiders out there. Naruto? Miranda gave him a wondering look. Shed all but forgotten to take his opinion into consideration, and in the face of possible conflict, he was her sword and shield. She could accept their request for help but couldn't actually carry through without him. This power armor, Naruto turned to address Preston. How much protection does it offer? Near unlimited, provided the limb pieces are in working order. Most models, including the one up there, are sealed tight and have built-in rebreathers. Gives you that extra protection against radiation, as well as from bullets. Sturgis provided instead. What he said, Preston confirmed. Impressive and very much useful in protecting Miranda in ways he would be unable to until and if he fully recovered. Well, do it, Naruto confirmed. Great, thank you so much, Preston said gratefully. There's also a minigun on that bird's side, Sturgis continued. There's no telling if it's got any ammo or if even the damn thing works anymore, but assuming it does, well then those boys out there won't be much trouble to yaw. Thing is, Preston joined in, that suit takes a special power source, a portable nuclear power source, to be exact, and we know where to find one. Problem being it's downstairs and locked away behind a thick steel cage. Like I said before, I am a mechanic, not a computer tech, and the only way through is the terminal, which of course, is password protected. Sturgis finished presenting their objective. So if that's what we're faced with, will you still help us? Preston asked. Well, see what we can do, Miranda answered. She didn't know much about computers and doubted Naruto was much more knowledgeable in that regard considering where he came from. All she could hope for was to somehow find the password scribbled down somewhere. That's all we have the right to ask for. Thank you, the both of you, Preston said. Come on, Naruto. Miranda motioned for him to follow and he did, truly surprising her by chuckling quietly, a sound so very foreign coming from him. What? Nothing, you just lead on. His tone of voice was telling and Miranda flushed slightly. Sorry, I guess I didn't ask for your opinion before agreeing to help them, she acknowledged once they were alone. No, it's fine. Naruto shook his head at her concerns. They asked you for help and you decided to offer it, just stay alert. She didn't have to know his main motivation for helping Preston's group was more so for their convenience, and now to secure the armor above. I will. Now, they said the basement, right? Miranda asked. Yes, Naruto confirmed. Do you? She stopped in her tracks. Do you think there's another way down? They'd left quite a trail of recently deceased bodies on their way up. There's one way, but you might not like it, otherwise we really don't have the time to look for another way, Naruto said. Miranda held herself nervously. What may that be? You get on my back and we jump down to the bottom. I can cushion landing so neither of USLL get hurt, Naruto offered. That wasn't necessarily what worried her. Miranda shuddered at the very recent memory of what happened the last time she was on his back. Is there really no other option outside of looking for another way down or me climbing on your back? Miranda asked. Well, I felt like I almost fell last time and I'd really rather not repeat that. I guess I could hold you a different way. Naruto looked away. Yak now, in my arms. She couldn't go back through the trail of dead, not so soon. A small bout of embarrassment didn't sound so bad. Let's just get this done. Miranda sighed. Naruto couldn't deny the pleasantness of holding a woman in his arms after a long time, and he briefly flashed back to when he would carry Hinata around in such a way, every chance he could. Now are you sure you won't drop me? Miranda questioned. She quickly looked away when she realized just how close their faces were. I am sure. Just make sure you hold on, Naruto said as he approached the edge of the walkway. Miranda looked down to their coming jump and immediately buried her face into his chest and did her best to ignore the warmth and pleasant odor radiating off him. Such thoughts were not allowed to simmer as she suddenly felt her stomach launch into her throat at the accelerated fall. She screamed. Even after they landed down safely, Naruto had to lightly shake the panicking woman. It's okay, we're safe now. Miranda opened her eyes to confirm they indeed were at the bottom foyer. Oh, Naruto say they're down but was unable to pull away or stand straight with her continued hold of his neck. She realized this too quickly and let go. Sorry, she muttered, there was a heavy air between them. Let's find that power core, Naruto said, moving on. The two traversed down the stairs further, one floor until they reached the museum's generator. As expected, the contraption was locked behind a metal door. I'll see if I can get this opened, Miranda said. She opened the command prompt on the terminal and then the password recovery execution, where she was presented with multiple passwords, one of which the owner of the terminal was to recognize, though unfortunately she had only 3 attempts and far too many choices. So it's a glorified guessing game, Naruto commented behind her. Seems that way, Miranda said from over her shoulder and motioned him over with a nod of her head. Mind helping me guess? Why not? Naruto moved beside her and scanned over the words. I don't know, maybe try revolution. This is the Museum of the American Revolution, after all. Miranda attempted the word and was met with failure. Well, that's the only one that possibly made sense. Too bad password or 1234 errant choices. Oh wait, I see Patriot. Another failed attempt. Oh gosh darn it, Miranda huffed. The corner of Naruto's mouth twitched in amusement, a sentiment Miranda seemed to have sensed, and she shot him a glare. Sorry. Naruto apologized, not really know why. Miranda huffed and turned back to the screen, scanning every column of words. One more try. What do you think, Naruto? He gave the screen once over and found no distinct word in the bunch. It's your guess, he relented. Sure, put the responsibility on me if it's wrong, Miranda groused. She finally chose the word batter and it was also wrong. I give up, she shouted and crossed her arms. Yeah well, it's not like you have a. He paused, seeing the look she directed at him, and suddenly wondered why he decided now of all times to make joke. I'll figure something out. Miranda huffed again. Yeah, you do that. Naruto began considering his options. He could break the hinges off the door with a Rasengan, but that would be too draining on his dangerously low reserves. There was also the option to strengthen himself with chakra, resulting in minimal losses as one's body instinctively recycled its own energy. Unfortunately, even that was too much of a risk. That's when it hit him. What are you doing? Miranda asked as she watched him dig around his backpack. I am going to blow the door down, Naruto answered. Miranda took an involuntary step back, wondering if Shed heard him correctly for how casually he spoke. Excuse me. Naruto found the paper he was looking for and unsealed his ink. I am going to draw an explosive seal on the hinges, he explained. Isn't that a little dangerous inside a small room, with a nuclear core right there? Miranda questioned incredulously. It's a small and controlled charge. We used this all the time to breach doors without killing whoever was inside, Naruto said as he began drawing the rather basic seal. That didn't quell her worry. If you're sure, I am, but if you don't feel safe you can wait. Naruto trailed off, seeing Miranda at the top of the stairs, seated on the top step, looking down on him. Up there. I thought so too. She called down to him. Yeah, Naruto muttered. Miranda watched with bated breath as Naruto set 2 pieces of paper on the hinges, took 2 few steps back for comfort, making a strange hand motion. She quickly covered her ears with her fingers but was unable to look away. As stated, the explosion was minimal. In fact, she barely even heard it go off, and all she witnessed was a brief flash and the door was hanging off the locking mechanism alone. That wasn't so bad, she commented with a smile. You can come down now, Naruto said as he gestured towards the open door with a hint of something in his inflection. Shut up, Miranda muttered as she bounded down. Naruto finished pulling at the door until it snapped off and set it aside. He and Miranda studied the glowing orange core with shared trepidation. So do we just carry it around like a normal battery or, she trailed off, looking to him. I don't know, I could seal it away to be safe, Naruto suggested, returning her look of uncertainty. I'd feel better if you did, Miranda agreed. Naruto used the last of his real sealing paper to draw up a sturdier and more complex storage seal. Once done, he nodded at Miranda. She understood and pressed the large ejection button, and the lights immediately flickered until they shut off entirely, engulfing the basement in complete darkness. Naruto, in the dark, he felt her grip his arm tightly. It's okay. It looks like that was the museum's power source, so we'll be in the dark. Just stay close and it'll lead us out, Naruto said. Naruto activated his eyes and led Miranda along out of the basement. The force she used to grip his hand had him wondering if she was afraid of the dark, or what lurked within, considering the monstrosities they'd encountered so far. Finally they made to the ground level where enough sunlight permeated to allow them to see. Miranda removed herself from Naruto and stared at him in embarrassment. Instead of making fun of her, he looked up above them. We need to get to the top as quickly as possible. I imagine the ones outside will have noticed there's no more fighting in here. Seeing as how they weren't signaled in, they'll know their people were killed. It was still rather difficult for Miranda to come to terms with the fact Naruto was a soldier from his world and had the mentality of one. It also reminded her that, if not for his help, she likely wouldn't have made it too far on her own, considering there was much she failed to consider when fighting for survival. Miranda found she could only nod in acknowledgement, though she wasn't looking forward to walking past the dead. Something about his sudden nervous expression gave her pause. I'd like to jump back up there, but to do that, well, why no, Naruto said. Yeah, Miranda realized what he was implying. Okay. Naruto slowly walked to her and both looked away from one another as he took her in his arms again. Hold on tight. Naruto leapt from one floor to the next, prompting excited gasps from Miranda. 4 more leaps had them at the top level. That time she braved keeping her eyes open and found the experience was exhilarating. That was amazing, Miranda exclaimed. Given her previous reactions to his rides, Naruto wasn't expecting such a positive response. Better than running or falling? He asked. Miranda smiled sheepishly. Much better. They returned back to the room with the survivors. Seeing as how everything went dark, I am gonna assume you two managed to get the power core, Preston said in greeting. Yeah, but how'd you do it? Sturgis asked before either could get a word in. He smirked at Miranda. Bet you were able to crack the code there, huh, gorgeous? Actually, Naruto figured it out, Miranda said, almost sighing before she did so at his continued attempts. She glanced at Naruto, only to find him staring at Sturgis with his default stoicism, though his blue seemed different in a way she couldn't place. Did you now? Sturgis looked at Naruto with a different intrigue. How so? Well, get the suit now. Make sure your people are ready. Cover us until we can get it up and going. Don't engage them until we're ready, or else we'll give ourselves away. Though they probably already know we've taken out their forces by now, Naruto said, completely ignoring the man to address Preston. Yeah, that's what I figured, Preston said with a sigh. We're mighty low on ammo as it is, but we'll try our best. In that case, Naruto removed his backpack and emptied his spare bullets onto the table, along with the corresponding guns he retrieved from the dead. He pocketed a couple of handfuls, as well as the 2 magazines, and motioned towards the rest. Use these. Just keep in mind we'll be taking back anything you don't use. Naruto. Miranda reprimanded him in a whisper and through her teeth, elbowing him lightly when he showed no remorse. That's more than fine and fair with us. Preston threw a chuckle as he looked between the two. Let's go then. Naruto motioned Miranda along, once again ignoring the other survivors who all regarded him with varying expressions. The stairs down the hallway will lead you to the roof, Preston called after him. On your mark, well, shoot from the balcony. Naruto nodded but didn't respond to him as he once again led them upstairs. They found the downed vertibird along with the towering power armor on immediately, and he had to admit it was one impressive piece of machinery. Are you ready? Naruto asked as he unsealed the power core and pressed it into the armor. Following a metallic whir, the armor bloomed open to reveal the interior. I don't know about this, Naruto, Miranda began nervously. What if I don't fit and it crushes me? Naruto studied her from the top of her head, down to her feet. She wasn't necessarily short, but neither was she particularly tall. If her memories still remained accurate within his own, she was 5'5". She did, however, have rather nice proportions. Wide hips atop a pair of healthy thighs and average but plump breasts, all of which were well accentuated by the vault suit in a way he couldn't help but take notice of on more than one occasion, especially when he walked behind her. Miranda glanced away. You're staring. If it makes you feel better, I can try it out first, Naruto offered, trying to rid himself of such thoughts. It would, she said, sounding relieved. Naruto approached the suit with no rightful idea on how to actually enter or activate the armor. Without anything to go on, he simply tried stepping into it, placing his feet on the elevated platforms of the armor's legs and then slipped his hands into the gloves. This activated the armor, which closed around him promptly. He felt himself get pressed into the suit gently on all sides, down to all of his limbs, the hands of the suit tightening around his hands to fit like an actual glove. Soon after he felt a cooling breeze on his face, his crotch, and on his chest. It was almost as if the suit molded itself around him for a tight fit. This all happened within the span of a few moments, and in that time, all was dark before a clear video display appeared before him. Immediately after the suit began to buzz in warning, his vitals displayed what had already known. The Geiger counter in his field of vision projected his grim reality. The needle was in the red, dangerously close to its maximum reading. Alongside this, there was a warning informing him of a missing Pip-boy. Ignoring his reality briefly, Naruto turned to find Miranda gawking at him. "See, not so bad, if didn't crush me, it won't hurt you," Naruto said, his voice projecting from the suit with an electric tinge. "That's so cool." Miranda was now inches from him, trying to see through the suit's dark visor to see if she could see him. "All right, get out, I want to try." Inside the suit, Naruto almost smiled and tried to do just that. However, he quickly realized he hadn't the slightest idea on exactly how he was supposed to exit the suit. "I don't know how to." "What do you mean you don't know how to?" Miranda asked. "I mean I don't know how to get out," Naruto repeated. "All I can see in here is a display showing some information about the suit." "What are we supposed to do then?" Miranda asked. "I don't." Naruto remembered the turn dial on his back. "Try to turn the knob on my back." "Got it." Miranda approached the back of the suit and gripped the metal. Inside his suit, a proximity alarm sounded off and his screen presented a message, front and center. "Open T. 45 yes." Naruto had no way of choosing. "Yes?" He tried. "Yes what?" Miranda asked as she continued to try and force the no. She let out a squeak of surprise at the sudden sound of decompressing air. "You should get back," Naruto warned. The suit opened back up and Naruto stepped out. "Was it voice activated?" Miranda guessed. "Only after you tried to open it," Naruto said, "though it might work better for you since it was asking me for a Pip-boy." "Why would it?" Miranda's question was cut short by the ricochet of a bullet splattered the gravel on the roof. Naruto quickly pulled her bag off and pushed Miranda towards the armor. "Get in. Make sure you plant both feet on the platforms and set your hands inside the gloves," he instructed, grabbing her by the waist to hoist her into the suit. "I am in," Miranda announced as the armor closed around her. "Grab your gun and shoot at them until I can cover me while I get the minigun," Naruto said as he handed her a handgun to fire. "Naruto, I don't think I can do this." Miranda's reluctance was clear, even through the modulated voice. "Just fire in their general direction while I get the gun," Naruto shouted. Miranda reluctantly did so. The suit reverberated violently and almost in a constant as it deflected multiple shots. She could only hope her readings were accurate as the power armor seemed to be holding up well under the unrelenting gunfire. She flinched as a particular round bounced off her head, making her take a step back. Naruto shifted around Miranda and leapt into the vertibird. He idly acknowledged the skeletal remains in the pilot's seat as he reached for the minigun. Using his natural strength, he was able to pull the gun from its mount, bringing with it its munitions box. He was immensely frustrated to find the gun did not work. He followed a trail of wires from the minigun to the vertibird. Realizing it required a source of power to operate and had just torn it, Naruto dropped it and turned back to Miranda, seeing her stumbling beneath the sustained fire. He could hear Preston and his group returning fire, but from the sound of it, the only ones firing were likely only Preston himself, and potentially Sturgis. They would not be enough to push back the enemy, and he didn't know how much longer Miranda's armor would hold. If he didn't act soon, they would lose. Considering the sheer amount of bullets raining down on them, along with his many ailments, the possibility he would die was very much real. Naruto could only hope Preston and his group would care for Miranda in his absence should the worst come to pass. "Get back with the others," Naruto shouted as he ran for the edge. "I'll finish this." "Wait." Miranda reached out to him, watching hopelessly as he leapt across to the next rooftop where he began to fire at the ones below. She felt frustration burn at her own fear. Naruto was fighting desperately for all of their lives while she watched on from the safety of her power armor. Her gun trembled in her hand. She really did want to help Naruto, but ultimately, she could not overcome her fear. All Miranda could do was what he asked of her, running back inside with the personal promise of being of more help in the future. "Shit," Naruto said as he ducked behind a rooftop entryway. They quickly wizened up to his high ground and had sent reinforcements up to neighboring rooftops just as had used the last of his ammunition, the barrel of his gun steaming in its locked position. There were far more of the enemy than he could have ever suspected. A small army, truly. With his ranged advantage spent and his chakra just as low, Naruto had little choice but to engage them closely. "Fucking synth. Come out so I can kill you." Naruto created an illusionary clone and sent it out in the opposite direction to the one had taken. As expected, they focused their fire on the illusion while he moved into the nearest man stationed on was once an apothecary. He quickly killed the man, taking his knife back as well as ammunition for the shoddy rifle, quickly dispatching the other two which had taken to neighboring rooftops with well-aimed knife throws. But now even the most basic of movements was growing difficult, his entire body ached but no part more than his throbbing head, and he could feel the wounds beneath his suit had opened, the warmth of his own blood spreading in his chest. Naruto knew a prolonged fight would be just as dangerous as taking them on equal ground. Fighting them head-on wasn't the best option for him physically, but what little ammunition he found wouldn't be enough to end the remaining forces. What the fuck is he? A voice broke through the trifle. Naruto dropped down in an alleyway, taking 2 steps before an overwhelming sickening sensation flooded his belly. He wretched what little they'd eaten that morning and was worried seeing streaks of red streaking his regurgitation. Fuck, Naruto wiped his mouth on his sleeve. Hearing the something clink behind him, Naruto's eyes widened when he saw a grenade rolling on the ground. He quickly performed a shunshin a short distance outside of the alley just as the ordnance exploded. Before he could regain composure, a bullet tore through his shoulder, knocking him off balance. He was able to quickly ascertain the direction in which the bullet was fired and unloaded the last of his bullets into the rifleman hidden in the second story of a print shop, 3 of his 5 shots hitting their mark. 2 particularly menacing men stepped out from within what was once a deli, out of the line of sight of his support, leaving Naruto exposed in the middle of the street. Naruto cursed his recent luck as he realized they'd somehow repositioned themselves too far for him to reach in a single bound, considering his reserves were now only enough to keep him alive. "You," one of the men stepped forward. He was tall and heavily armored. "You killed them all, you goddamned monster." Naruto decided he needed to end them now or they would do the same to him. He also knew that if he were to stop now he wasn't sure he would be able to continue. His eyes flared to life, causing the 2 men to take a step back in surprise. He knew as he currently was he would be unable to outmaneuver a speeding bullet, but he could map out a general direction in which the men were going to fire by focusing in on their weapons and trigger fingers. Running as quickly as he was physically able, Naruto moved his body sporadically to avoid getting hit. In exerting himself, he began to see black splotches painting the edges of his vision. Knowing his limits were reached, Naruto used a shunshin to cover the remaining distance. He landed between the 2 men and grabbed both their necks, snapping them while also bringing them down to the ground with a sickening crunch. They died instantly and Naruto proceeded to double over again, regurgitating a mixture of yellow and a deeper shade of red bile, his entire body burning in pain. He tried to walk towards the nearest building but ended up falling. He had no way of knowing if the 2 had just killed were the final 2, so he crawled when he could no longer walk. Naruto found himself in an old furniture store where he dragged himself to the nearest sofa and laid on it. From within a seal he retrieved his backpack and drew a water bottle and a box containing his sole remaining pill. He quickly downed both and leaned his head back with a tired sigh. The cool dark shadows soothed him and he closed his heavy eyes, feeling incredibly tired, almost as if had never slept before in his life. "I used too much chakra," Naruto realized. He was suffering from complete chakra exhaustion, something had done only twice and was subsequently scolded by both Sakura and Tsunade. The only difference being now, he had neither to heal him, nor Kurama to resupply him with chakra. He began to fade in and out of awareness and his thoughts began to scramble and it almost sounded like someone was calling his name, but he was too comfortable to care. Unaware of the blood leaking from the corner of his mouth, Naruto decided he was going to sleep. His only regret was having failed another person. That was until the voice began to sound familiar. "Hinata?" Naruto felt himself being lifted just as everything faded away. In a reversal of roles, Miranda held Naruto in her arms as she frantically followed Preston back to the Museum of Freedom. Uncaring of the bodies she stepped over, she could focus on little else than Naruto's still form. "Set him down," Preston instructed. Miranda did so and lumbered back to allow the man to inspect Naruto. Meanwhile she fiddled with her Pip-Boy through the display on her left arm until she found the section that controlled the power armor's settings. She was back at Naruto's side as soon as the armor opened. "Is he shot?" she asked. "I can't tell. His wounds are bleeding but I think he may have been hit on the shoulder," Preston said. "Sturgis, get the med kit." Sturgis returned with a bag and a gallon of water. "Here ya go." Preston poured the water over the bleeding wraps and cut them off with the same knife he used to cut the vault suit open. All present flinched, seeing the wounds oozing blood slowly and unfortunately, steadily. "The poor boy, he's suffering from radiation poisoning," Mama Murphy stated grimly. "Shit, she's right," Sturgis agreed lowly. "It explains the profuse bleeding in his more shallow wounds," Preston added as he continued to hold pressure. "What the hell are you saying?" Miranda demanded through tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. "He's just hurt. He isn't sick. He would have told me if he was sick." "I am sorry, Miranda," but he displays all of the symptoms: pale skin, dark under eyes. His wounds won't clot properly, Preston said. I thought I noticed it earlier, but I didn't want to mention it because I wasn't sure. Has he been throwing up recently or, the alternative? Miranda felt her desperation growing with every word. No, he killed this huge monster and that's why he's hurt. Preston and Sturgis shared a look between them. You have a pip-boy, take it off and put it on him. It'll show us just how much radiation he's sick with, Sturgis suggested. Her shaking hands made it difficult to unbuckle the device from her arm, but when she did, she gently clasped it around Naruto's. As soon as she did so, the radiation counter shot into the red and a warning appeared on the pip-boy. The cartoonish depiction of her person, now male, looked sick. His entire torso indicated a grievous injury. No, Miranda whispered. No, he's going to be okay. He has to be. He promised he'd help me find my daughter. He can't, he promised. Sturgis, get the rat away, Preston ordered. He looked to Miranda with a look of determination she didn't see. I won't let him break that promise. Well, save him. Miranda didn't seem to take notice of what he said. Instead, her hand was reaching for Naruto, mere inches from his face but unable to touch him. Do you know how rare and expensive that shit is? Mercy interjected loudly. Why should we waste it on him? It's obvious he's dying. Sturgis was of a like mind, showing so by standing in place, uncertainty playing on his features. We're doing this because he risked his life to save ours. Now get the fucking rat away right now, Preston demanded this time around, visibly surprising the survivors he traveled with. In all their time together, they'd never heard him curse. Knowing he was given an order, Sturgis disappeared from sight. It'll be a waste on him. Mercy continued her rant. Just look at him. He's been shot, he's torn to shit, and he's bleeding out. I say we let him die or else. Miranda was on her feet and in another first, struck Mercy across the face with her fist, sending her sprawling. You shut your mouth right now. She stepped forward as the downed woman crawled back. I am not going to lose him too, so if you try and get in the way, I'll kill you myself. Now that's quite enough, dear, Mama Murphy interjected calmly. Your young friend is stronger than you know. Do not leave his side and all will be okay. Mercy's husband, John, tried to help his wife to her feet, but was downtrodden when she ripped herself free of his grip and stormed away. Actually, Mama Murphy, if you'll take Miranda with you while Sturgis and I work on him. Preston glanced at the woman in question. You may not want to see this. I am staying, Miranda announced firmly as she returned to Naruto's side. She held his hand from behind the sofa so as to be out of their way. Yes, ma'am. Preston almost smiled at the display. He turned to Sturgis, who'd returned in time to witness the scuffle. You ready? I never am, Sturgis lamented following a sigh, but yeah, let's do this. Miranda's focus remained on Naruto's face throughout the ordeal and just how young he looked when he was sleeping. Shed even brave touching the whisker-like marks on his cheeks. Something Shed been curious about but never had the courage to outright ask him about, considering he'd come from a world constantly at war. His rosy cheeks were soft to the touch, if a bit rough from the beginnings of a beard. The marks themselves felt slightly indented but also pliable and just as soft. They seemed perfectly symmetrical, making her wonder if they were scars or actual birthmarks. Whatever the case, his whiskers, combined with his bright blonde hair and beautiful blue eyes, made him look rather adorable. But he was also very handsome, unaware of where her thoughts were straying. Miranda's fingers traced his strong jaw, a positive reminder of his strength, and then up to his burning forehead beneath his hairline. She palmed it, now not so much surprised by how hot he ran, but just as concerned. For the rest of the makeshift operation she was actively ignoring. She focused on his forehead, from palming it to moving to touch it with the back of her hand, trying redundantly to somehow cool him off by absorbing some of his heat. It's done, Preston announced, breaking Miranda from her odd trance. She glanced down to find both Preston and Sturgis both bloodied and sweaty, though their appearances was a mere acknowledgement as she focused on the full-bodied bandages wrapped around Naruto's chest, quickly darkening with blood. From his free arm was an intravenous line leading up to an IV bag hanging from an old hat rack. Will he be okay? Miranda asked Preston after he had returned from washing himself. We can only hope so, if I am being honest. Usually radiation levels so high require a lengthy hospital visit and more rad away than we have. Well, from what I am told. Anyway, Preston seemed to add as a response to Miranda's own visible worry. You'll have to keep him hydrated while he rests. Other than that, we're just gonna have to wait and see how he reacts. The hell we are. Mercy began again. We can't stay here. What if more of those fucking raiders show up? Tell them, John. Beside her, the man seemed to shrink into himself. Well, they did save us. Why did I even marry you? Mercy groaned. He's right, Preston said with full authority in his voice. They've helped us tremendously when they had no need to. They saved us and so now, we'll be returning the favor and staying put until he recovers. That's final. Mercy muttered a curse beneath her breath before storming away. I am sorry about that, Preston apologized to Miranda. "We really do appreciate the help and I am sorry Naruto's in this position. But Mama Murphy did say he would be okay and I reckon I believe her. She has amazing visions, you know." His words scarcely reached Miranda, who'd taken to moving Naruto's head into her lap. One of her hands palmed his head through the mess that was his hair, while the other continued absorbing the heat radiating from his forehead. Preston once again smiled seeing this and turned to Mama Murphy. "Can I leave them in your care for now? I need to help Sturgis secure the perimeter, just in case." "Of course, dear," she answered simply. "Thank you," Preston said in parting. I end here, so see next video friends.